Chapter 1054. Looks like the plan is going well, isn't it? Staring at the image transmitted by the magic mirror, Zhang Cheng rested his chin on one hand as a faint smile appeared on his face. As Kerwin officially declared war on the surrounding lords, in less than a month and a half, he had already conquered the entire Western province. Because of the speed, most of the opponents did not even have time to react before their sturdy castles and walls were overrun by endless monsters. There was no time for them to ask for help from the outside world. To be precise, with the relatively backward communication method of this planet, the kingdom probably did not know what was happening here. By the time they realized what was happening, there would be no more resistance. They would either obediently submit to Kerwin as a tool or be executed by their entire family. It should be noted that overthrowing the current ruling class through riots was not an easy thing to do, regardless of the era. Not to mention the shocking gap in equipment, just the quality of the mob and the professional army was enough to form an absolute suppression. Many of the so-called powerful rebel armies in history were, in fact, because the ruling class did not pay attention to them at first. As a result, they were given time and opportunity to grow and gradually turn from a mob to a professional army. Otherwise, as long as the ruling class took it seriously, any riots by the ordinary people would not be able to shake the foundation of the ruling class, even if it was a complete tyranny. Islands placed one hand on his chest and bowed deeply in response. Of course, Master. You gave them so many monsters, if they can't even fight a mob, then they are too useless. Don't be too harsh. You have to understand that conquering, occupying, and ruling are three completely different states. The first state only needs to destroy the current ruling class. The second state needs to destroy most of the resistance. And the third state needs to let the civilians in the occupied area accept the new ruler and no longer have the double psychological and physical resistance. Our Lord Kerwin is obviously not satisfied with the first two. He wants to become a true king. Zhang Cheng explained meaningfully. After all, conquering was never a difficult thing. Just like the famous conquerors on Earth, whether it was Alexander who was praised by the Western world, or Temujin who was known as the strongest butcher, or Napoleon who was the greatest commander of France, on the surface, they all seemed to have a glorious record, and a large area of land was under their control. But in reality, they only occupied the land on the surface and did not purge the original vested interest groups in the land. Instead, they gave them benefits and privileges and turned them into their own supporters. The advantage of doing so was that they could use the lowest cost to maintain their rule and restore order in the occupied areas, providing them with a steady stream of resources and taxes. As for the disadvantage, it was naturally that after his death, the huge empire he had built with his own hands would collapse and split into countless forces, each of which would act independently. There is no doubt that this was the easiest kind of conquest, a political and military venture, and that there was no political reorganization or cultural integration. However, Kerwin was different. He knew how to use the power he had at hand to destroy the original ruling class in the occupied areas and rope in those talents who were not successful or were suppressed. He then reconstructed the ruling structure to ensure that he would always be the core of the ruling class. Zhang Cheng could sense a growing ambition from this guy. King? I don't think so. What's more, a mere king who rules over mortals is nothing in your eyes. Without your support, it won't take long for him to be devoured by countless enemies. Islands pursed his lips and did not hide his contempt for Kerwin. Mortals. Zhang Cheng glanced at the youth from the corner of his eye and shook his head lightly. Don't look down on mortals. You have to understand that when a mortal's strength reaches a certain level, they can also kill gods. What determines victory and defeat is never some high and mighty status, nor is it some bullshit reputation. It is power, absolute power. As long as you are strong enough and kill all opposition, even evil can be turned into justice. However, if you don't have enough power, even if you have the moral and legal high ground, you won't be able to make the strong pay the price. Power is truth, power is justice, and power can give you everything. I understand. Don't worry, I won't let anyone surpass me. I will always be your most capable assistant. The youth bowed again. I hope so. You have to know that I'm not a very patient person. I don't have the time to wait for you to slowly grow. So, bring my gift to Kerwin's side and help him defeat the powerful enemies that are about to come. This is a dangerous trial. Go and prove yourself." With that, Zhang Cheng waved his hand lightly, indicating that the youth could leave. "As you wish." Without another word, Islands turned and disappeared around the corner of the corridor. It wasn't hard to tell from the fire in his eyes that he desired a stage more than anyone else to prove his strength. However, the youth had no idea that the moment he left, Zhang Cheng stood up and smiled at the balcony of the room on the top floor of the tower. He took the initiative to greet the youth. "Hello, unknown ruler. May I know what business you have with me?" "Ah, you found me. This is really an unexpected surprise." Accompanied by a sharp, ear-piercing voice, an unknown creature that was less than half a meter tall and as thin as a matchstick slowly walked out of the darkness. It looked like an insect, its body covered in a thick carapace. Its head was semicircular, and 12 eyes were evenly distributed on both sides. In the middle was a mouth that looked like a mouthpart. "You are?" Zhang Cheng subconsciously frowned, raising his vigilance to the highest level. "You can call me Gru. As you wish. I am a ruler of the Chaos faction. I happened to be passing by and discovered the ripples of string, so I hurried over to take a look. I didn't expect you to be playing an interesting game here," explained a strange ruler who called himself Gru. Zhang Cheng clearly didn't understand the other party's intentions. He cautiously probed, so I thought, perhaps I can join in on this game. After all, the best way to train one's abilities isn't to figure it out alone. You need an opponent of equal strength. Of course, I won't attack you directly. Instead, I'll copy what you're doing and choose a faction to use the power of laws to create a creature. Let's see who has a better grasp of the power of laws," Gru suggested as he waved his curved limbs. "That sounds pretty good, but I think that since it's a game, there should naturally be some rules." "That's right. Since you're a newbie, the first rule is that you go first." Chapter 1055. There was no doubt that the Dominators were the supreme life form of the entire universe, holding the ultimate authority. Their terrifying power could even create star clusters, interfere with certain species, and allow them to rapidly evolve from their most primitive state, and then establish a glorious space civilization. However, most of the Dominators were not like what was described in many sci-fi novels, who liked to create and interfere with the progress of civilization. On the contrary, compared to that, they prefer to hide in the dark and observe, occasionally carrying out a few unknown experiments in games. As a member of the Chaos faction, Gru did not like to have too much contact with his own kind. This was because although he felt that chaos was the normal state of the universe, he was not too keen on destroying order. In his eyes, no matter what form of order it would inevitably collapse after developing to a certain extent, merging into the endless chaos and chaos. Thus, there is no need to waste time and energy fighting with order or the neutral faction. As long as he patiently waited, the universe would inevitably return to its original state. Of course, as a Dominator who had lived for who knew how long, he was very happy to see a newcomer join his faction. After learning that Zhang Cheng had become a Dominator, he spread his eggs to every corner of the universe, trying to find traces of him. In the end, his efforts paid off. After traveling for a long time in a higher dimension of the universe, he finally found the fluctuations of a string on this remote planet. Without any hesitation, he directly came here and found Zhang Cheng conducting a small experiment. So interesting, so novel. Gru could not help but want to join in and play a game with this mysterious new Dominator, a game that used all life on this planet as a bargaining chip. As for whether the creatures on this planet would undergo major changes or become permanently extinct because of this, it didn't matter at all. In the eyes of the Dominators, all intelligent life forms, including humans, were essentially no different from how humans looked at ants. When they were in a good mood, they would throw something as a reward, and when they were in a bad mood, they would crush them into meat paste with a stomp. Even more extreme, they would pour insecticide and boiling liquid metal into the ant hole, cleaning it up once and for all. There was no moral burden. Even more so, he wouldn't have any hypocritical compassion. After several hours of discussion, they finally came up with the specific rules of the game. Looking at the strange appearance of the other party, Zhang Qing asked with great interest, "Can you tell me about the Dominators? I'm very curious. What have you been doing all this while? You can actually tolerate several organizations launching a superstring war and watch them destroy and devour the star cluster. Hee, you're still young. You won't be able to understand us old fellows who are stuck in eternity. Curiosity has long since disappeared from our minds and souls. There are no secrets in the universe for us. Of course, the appearance of you and another one of your kind has brought a new light to the originally silent universe. That's why I left my residence and searched aimlessly for the two of you," Gru replied as he waved his bent limbs. "No secrets?" Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. Gru nodded without hesitation. "That's right. There are no secrets. One had to know that although the universe was very big and could be said to be boundless, the rules and forces that maintained its operation were fixed and had not changed since the beginning. When you begin to deeply understand the meaning and power of your own existence, you will realize that the rules of the universe are actually very simple, so simple that they are completely open to life forms like you and me, without any secrets. So that's how it is." Zhang Cheng's eyes revealed a hint of understanding. From the conversation just now, he had already deduced that the sovereigns who had fused with the mainstream were actually one with the entire universe. As long as he found the key on his body, he could immediately open the treasury and obtain endless knowledge and power. "Don't be anxious, my young friend. You are still an egg that has just been born. You need a certain amount of time to hatch. Believe me, this process is incomparably wonderful. Don't think too much. Let your whole body and mind be immersed in it. No other sovereigns will attack you at this time, even if they are your enemies." Gru seemed to have sensed something and took the initiative to comfort him. "Why? Isn't it better to kill the enemy in advance?" Zhang Cheng clearly could not understand this way of thinking that allowed the enemy to grow. Gru shook his round head and explained, "Don't use your mortal thinking to imagine the sovereign's way of doing things. We are the supreme life form of this universe. To a certain extent, we represent the will of the entire universe. Nothing can truly kill us. The so-called faction wars are not to destroy the other party, but to forcefully change the other party's ideology. Do you know? In the Chaos faction, there are 3 members who defected from the Order faction. The Order faction also has members who defected from the Chaos faction. It is not the factions that decide our actions, but your heart and soul." "Sorry, I still don't quite understand." Zhang Cheng's brows were tightly knitted, feeling as if his brain had entered a state of logical confusion. The sovereigns could not be killed. This was not very surprising. What truly surprised him was that the factions of the sovereigns could be changed. It sounded like they could be changed at any time without fear of being punished. "Listen to what I say. The sovereign's actions are determined by your heart and soul. This means that if your thoughts change, or if the universe affects your will, it can lead to a series of inconceivable changes. Regarding this, every sovereign will experience it. The difference is that some sovereigns adhere to their original ideals, while others choose what they think is better. The most interesting thing is that up until now, the universe has always maintained some sort of balance, such that the 3 factions each have 10 sovereigns. But now, the appearance of the 2 of you has broken this balance. This also means that the universe is about to undergo a series of changes, and only one faction will be the final victor." Gru's tone was low and deep when he said this, as if he was communicating with an even greater will. However, Zhang Cheng had never been interested in these mysterious prophecies. He sneered and shook his head as he retorted, "No, you're wrong. The universe has always been changing. It's just that most of the time, it's too slow for anyone to notice. Also, I haven't decided if I want to join the Chaos faction, so you don't have to treat me as an ally." "Ha ha, perhaps. However, I definitely won't be wrong about you joining the Chaos faction. This is because your soul is constantly emitting a dark, mellow fragrance. There's no need to doubt that it's the embodiment of the power of chaos. Blocked chapters are requesting to be unblocked. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1056. There is no doubt that Zhang Cheng had obtained a lot of important information from his short conversation with Gru, even though he was still unable to determine which of the information was true and which were lies. However, as the saying went, as long as one was smart enough, even fake information would have considerable reference value. When this unknown creature whose entire body was made of mysterious metal turned and left, the magic tower once again returned to its previous tranquility and peace. Other than the monsters hidden in the massive underground maze, there was nothing else that could make a sound. To be more precise, the things that could make a sound had long been wiped out. Even the insects were all dead, leaving behind only a primeval forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. Looking at the oval-shaped metal egg left behind by the creature before it left, Zhang Cheng smiled and muttered to himself, "What an interesting life form. To be able to integrate the laws of the universe into such a small thing, causing it to produce all sorts of changes. But I'm not to be trifled with. Just wait and see. The thing I create will give you a big surprise." As soon as he finished speaking, he crushed the metal egg and held the metal bug that was only the size of a fingernail at the tip of his finger, feeling the unlimited potential that this little thing had. Even though it was just a larva that had yet to fully mature, it still possessed extremely high intelligence. It constantly released mental attacks in an attempt to break free from the creature's control, further controlling and occupying the creature's thoughts. If it were an ordinary adult, they would probably have become the captive of this little thing, parasitized and integrated into a certain race to reproduce. Eventually, the entire race would be controlled, intercepting the race's genetic inheritance and creating a civilization with deceptive characteristics. It had to be said that if one were to exclude the fact that they were controlled by the Creator, just from the perspective of survival and reproduction, these metal bugs had indeed evolved to the extent that they would almost never go extinct. This was because no matter what kind of enemy they encountered, they would silently infiltrate the enemy's internal structure and conquer civilization through parasitism. What was even more terrifying was that one of these eggs had been thrown into a certain city on this planet. In a few years at most, it would snowball and multiply by hundreds of thousands. It might even create something that far surpassed the entire technological level of this planet. Fighting against such a terrifying enemy was simply a nightmare for all civilizations. Fortunately, Zhang Cheng was not a civilization, but a ruler who had mastered the supreme laws of the universe. Therefore, he could use a similar method to deal with these little bugs. In addition, he also received some hints about how to use rule-bending power. It was obvious that Gru was using this method to teach him how to become a qualified ruler. However, for the residents of this relatively primitive and backward planet, they were completely unaware that they were about to become pawns in a game between the two most terrifying rulers of the universe. They were still fighting endlessly for their own interests. For example, Kerwin, who had swallowed the entire western province, had begun to methodically establish a new ruling structure and forcibly recruit a large number of young adults into the army, hoping to train them into qualified soldiers before the kingdom counterattacked. For the sake of his growing ambition, he had completely become a tyrant. As long as he could stabilize and expand his power and status, he did not care how much destruction he would cause, nor did he care how many people would die in this war. Even those monsters that originally looked disgusting were gradually becoming mighty and extraordinary. Everything stemmed from pragmatism. Everything that was beneficial to him was good, and everything that was disadvantageous to him was bad. The originally complicated adult world had suddenly become so simple and intuitive, especially when he had great power in his hands. The fear and reverence from the vassals and citizens of his territory was simply irresistible. Tasting the slightly sour wine, Kerwin sighed slightly and said without turning his head to Isolde, who was standing not far away, "My friend, do you know what is the most regrettable thing in my life?" "What is it?" Isolde asked very cooperatively. "Naturally, it's not being able to meet our master earlier. If I had met him earlier, I'm afraid I would have established a huge country before the age of 30, a strong country that is completely unaffected by any political influence. Kerwin said excitedly as he waved his arms. He could not believe that there was actually someone in this world who was willing to give up so many resources and not ask for anything in return. Instead, he was willing to give the greatest benefits to himself. Stupid and low-level thinking. I guess you don't understand our master at all, and you don't understand his true intentions, right? Isolde sneered and shook his head. Compared to the power, money, status, and enjoyment of the mundane world, what he really cared about was the endless magical knowledge. It was the end of the path to the highest level and the mystery of immortality. What was power? Even the greatest of empires would perish one day. However, knowledge and power would never fade with the passage of time. Ha ha! All right, I admit that I don't understand what you spellcasters are thinking, but the result is that not only do we not have any conflicts, but we also complement each other perfectly. The only challenge now is to block the counterattack of the kingdom and then defeat it bit by bit. You know what? I can't wait to see Venger V kneeling on the ground and announcing his surrender. Oh, by the way, I heard that he has a beautiful daughter. Perhaps I can consider marrying her to the throne. Kerwin did not hide his greed and desire at all when he said this. From a certain point of view, he was already a qualified tyrant. He could put his own interests above everyone else's without hesitation. Don't be too complacent. Don't forget that there have been more than a dozen mass escapes of the people under your rule in the past week. Although you've ordered the execution of some of them, panic is still spreading rapidly. If you can't think of a good solution, it won't be long before your kingdom has no subjects left and only tens of thousands of ugly monsters will be left. Isolde reminded with a half-smile. High-pressure rule was very effective in times of chaos and could quickly restore social order. However, the negative effects of high pressure were also outstanding, and the most typical one was escape. Just like how Germany was divided into two at the end of World War II, there were countless people in East Germany who fled over the Berlin Wall to West Germany every year. Whether it was East Germany or West Germany, they were essentially puppet states with neither complete sovereignty nor bullshit democracy and freedom. However, the way the Soviet Union ruled East Germany was far more oppressive than West Germany under NATO's control. Similarly, Kerwin's high-pressure rule would also cause a large number of people to choose to escape, and most people did not think that he could defeat the counterattack of the kingdom's army. Chapter 1057. Damn it! Can you not bring up such a dampening topic at such a happy time? How could those ignorant commoners possibly understand my lofty ideals? They should have been like cattle, sacrificing everything for a great cause, instead of being shameful traitors like they are now. Kerwin was instantly enraged at the mention of the mass exodus. Regardless of whether he was a high and mighty noble lord or an ambitious schemer, he had never placed the people at the bottom of the hierarchy in his eyes. He even felt that it was right and proper for him to rule over them. The people at the bottom of the hierarchy should obediently obey the Lord's orders, even if the orders would cause them to go bankrupt or even give up their lives. Unfortunately, intelligent beings were not livestock like cows or horses. They had their own independent thinking and judgment. Sometimes they would choose to temporarily endure out of fear, but if they crossed the line and caused an existential crisis, then the destructive power of the ordinary citizens would be enough to destroy a country. Even if there were some powerful individuals who could forcefully suppress the riots, the destruction to the social structure and productivity would be fatal. Isolde sneered and pursed his lips. Oh, come on. Put away that disgusting face of yours. Look at your recent decree. If I were a citizen living in your territory, I would choose to flee without hesitation. But don't worry. As long as we defeat the kingdom's counterattack and get closer to the capital, the lower classes will understand that they have nowhere to run and will naturally behave themselves. But the problem is, our strength is far from the kingdom's. Excluding those fearless monsters, the strength of the light on paper can't even withstand a single charge from the enemy. Calvin sighed helplessly as he complained. Just as Isolde was about to say something, a strong magical wave suddenly came from the room. In the next second, Islands walked out of the teleportation door. He first looked around, then placed a bag full of potions on the table, and said in a cold and emotionless voice, "This is the latest magic potion. Anyone who consumes it will temporarily gain powerful spellcasting abilities, but the consequence is that they will die on the spot after the effect is over. I believe that with this potion, we should be able to form an army of spellcasters that can match the kingdom." "Oh, how was it made?" Isolt's eyes glowed. "I'm sorry, but you don't deserve to know. Also, Master hopes that you can move faster. Otherwise, he will be very disappointed." Alan straightforwardly expressed his threat. "Move faster? You mean we should take the initiative to attack?" Kerwin's expression changed drastically. Offense and defense were two completely different concepts. The former was only a smart choice when one had the advantage in all aspects. The latter, even if one was in an absolutely disadvantageous position, one could use tactics and geographical advantages to bridge the gap. "That's right. What, are you scared?" Island sneered as he glanced at the man. Kerwin quickly shook his head. No, he wasn't afraid. The forces at hand were insufficient to launch an all-out attack on the king. If we take the initiative to attack, it's very likely that we'll be ambushed. The enemy will take advantage of the time difference to attack our base and cut off our fragile supply line. Don't think too much. Master will provide you with enough troops. At the latest, there will be at least 20,000 fully armed alchemy puppets joining your army in 2 planets. With them, you won't have to worry too much even if you face the charge of heavy cavalry. All right, the discussion of taking the initiative to attack ends here. What you need to do is not to discuss the feasibility, but to carry it out without compromise. Don't try to guess Master's thoughts. His eyes see further than all of you combined. With these words full of warning, Islands once again cast a teleportation spell and disappeared on the spot. After watching his afterimage disappear completely, Kerwin slammed the table and cursed in a low voice. "Bastard! Who's he think he is? He's just a lucky merchant's son. Now he's acting all high and mighty. Calm down. Islands may be of humble birth, but he's the only assistant left by Master's side. Whether it's strength or status, he's above you and me. Don't try to provoke him for now. What we need to do is to prove ourselves and further improve our position in Master's heart. Only then can we have a chance to replace him," Isolt suggested while stroking the sparse beard on his chin. "I'm not an idiot. I'm just a little angry. But you're right. We have to find a way to pull him down, or at least ensure that he's on the same level as us. Otherwise, we'll be very passive in the future." Kerwin's eyes flashed with a chilling light. No one in power would like someone to ride on their head and shit on them. And no tyrant would allow an uncontrollable target like Islands to appear and leave as he pleased. Perhaps we can consider forming a secret alliance. I'll join. As long as we can pull him down, I'm willing to pay any price. In that case, our alliance is established. When Kerwin and Isolt were holding each other's right hand, they had no idea that Zhang Cheng was observing their every move from afar in the tower. He didn't forget to tease them. "How impressive. Islands, you don't seem to be very likable, do you? They're just 2 sets of dogs that flatter you in order to get more food, and I'm your most loyal assistant." The young man's face was ashen as he replied, "Ha ha, what a vivid metaphor. But it's not easy to be my assistant. You're far from reaching the standard. Also, don't forget that even if they're dogs, they're still my dogs. Next time, don't put on that arrogant face of yours without my permission. Remember, a true powerhouse needs to remain humble and constantly learn from the people around him, even from his enemies." "Understood. I'll do my best to reach the standard you expect. If there's nothing else, please allow me to take my leave." "Go. I'm looking forward to your future performance." After a short conversation, Islands quickly turned and left for the library. Kerwin and Isolt's attitude made him realize that his position wasn't as secure as he'd thought. He had to quickly improve his strength and strive to reach a level where his competitors couldn't catch up. Chapter 1058. Magic Golems, also known as constructs, were mechanical life forms created with the aid of magic. Generally speaking, most spellcasters like to use materials such as stones and metals, which were relatively sturdy and difficult to destroy, to create some guards with large bodies and great destructive power. They were used to protect their residences and wealth from external enemies. Among them, the most powerful constructs were also known as golems. Every golem had a considerable amount of magic resistance and immunity, and was specially designed to deal with opponents who were also spellcasters. To give Kerwin enough power to launch an attack, Zhang Cheng personally created an elite steel golem army. When these 4-meter-tall, silver-gray creatures with arms filled with killing tools passed through the forest and appeared outside the walls, the citizens of the city fell into a state of panic. The ones who fell in a panic were the civilians who were already frightened. They couldn't imagine what kind of terrifying monster the tyrant had made a deal with to obtain such a daunting steel army that could cause the enemy to fall into despair. The ones whose blood was boiling with excitement were naturally Kerwin and his loyal vassals. There were a total of 20,000 magic puppets made of steel. They were a group of iron-blooded soldiers who were not afraid of death at all. Most importantly, they were invulnerable, and ordinary weapons could not harm them. Even those who were not sensitive to military matters would realize that there was probably no other country in the world that had an elite army that could compare to this steel army. Ha ha! Good heavens! This cold touch. Absolute obedience. This is the ideal soldier in every commander's heart. Unbelievable. Master actually gave me 20,000 in one go. Kerwin laughed maniacally as he stroked the sturdy outer shell of the golems. He couldn't help but laugh. With such an army as his base, he was not only confident he could destroy the kingdom's expeditionary force, he was also confident he could conquer the fortified castles and expand his territory by 10-fold. No, 100-fold. My lord, please give me 1,000 steel golems. I'm willing to be the vanguard of the army and eradicate all enemies that stand in your way. Baron Kalenst was the first to kneel and beg for battle. Ever since he personally charged into his enemy's home and slaughtered all his relatives, he had completely joined Kerwin's side and became the tyrant's henchman. He even enjoyed the pleasure of killing. Relax, my dear Baron. Now that we have enough leverage, it's time to give up on our cautious plans and go all out. Gather everyone for a military meeting. I want to defeat the royal family and replace them in one fell swoop. Kerwin's lips curled into a sinister smile, as if he could already see the steel army appearing on the battlefield and crushing the kingdom's forces. After all, one of the most important rules of victory in war was to take the enemy by surprise and attack when they least expect it. Before the enemy is ready, one must attack where the enemy least expects it. It could be foreseen that due to the lack of information, the royal family's generals wouldn't even dream of encountering 20,000 steel golems in the remote western province. That was why they were doomed from the start. Now, the only thing they had to consider was how to maximize their gains and wipe out their forces to break the kingdom's backbone once and for all so that they wouldn't have the guts to face them head-on again. Otherwise, if they missed this opportunity, it would be hard to find another one like this. Even the stupidest of generals wouldn't be foolish enough to let their bodies clash with steel. That would be no different from sending themselves to their deaths. As you wish. Baron Kalenst bowed with one hand on his chest and quickly turned to inform his colleagues. It had to be said that after a series of iron-fisted reforms, Kelvin had gathered almost all of the authority in his hands. The greatest benefit of centralization was that it eliminated the endless wrangling and allowed him to gather resources and strength in one place at the fastest speed. In less than half an hour, more than a dozen trusted aides or vassals who had made military contributions during the expansion gathered in the hall of the castle and began to discuss intensely about how to lure the kingdom's army into a suitable battlefield and then wipe them out in one fell swoop. None of them knew that the meeting they thought was a secret was being magnified in a magic mirror. Appreciating the flawed thoughts and plans of these local creatures, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. How stupid. How shallow. How foolish. I can't believe I picked a bunch of idiotic creatures as my agents. Don't be so harsh. Do you expect these barbaric and civilized creatures to be able to see through the past, present, and future of a universe like you and me? No, even the advanced civilizations that have entered the interstellar era don't understand what the universe means to them, Gru said as he waved his forelimbs. Ever since he finished casting the eggs, he had returned to the tower to observe what his new brethren were doing. Occasionally, they would get together to exchange their views on life, race, civilization, society, order, religion, and ethics. The only thing they didn't talk about was the use of energy and laws. They knew that it wouldn't take long for the results to be revealed in the game. Instead of just exchanging words, it would be better to throw them into actual combat and see who was better. Zhang Qing nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps you're right. Due to the limitations of their knowledge and technology, most intelligent life forms are bound by gravity to their home planet. Some have never been more than 20 kilometers away from their birthplace. In their eyes, their birthplace was the entire world. As for places further away, they only existed in all sorts of outrageous legends and stories. Under such circumstances, ignorance, stupidity, and stupidity are the norm. It doesn't matter how smart they are. That's a clear and profound description. But I'm curious, what's your birthplace like? Has it also entered the era of interstellar civilization? Gru probed with interest. The home planet where I was born? Zhang Cheng's eyes flashed with a strange light, followed by a smile. I'm sorry, I don't know how to describe it, but I can guarantee that it hasn't entered the interstellar era. At most, it has just touched the threshold of interstellar civilization. Just like the natives I saw earlier, my original race's history is filled with war, violence, blood, and slaughter. Their hatred for each other even surpasses everything. Chapter 1059. So, the place you were born on is a planet full of conflict, cruel competition, and plunder. Even the same species will be divided into different countries and groups based on differences in genes, skin color, culture, religion, and interests. The victors will get everything, and the losers will even be deprived of their right to live. After listening to Zhang Cheng's introduction, Gru's eyes glowed with undisguised curiosity. Almost all planets in the universe that had given birth to life could be divided into two situations. The first was that the inhabitants of the planet had completed their internal unification and had begun to actively expand into outer space. This was the so-called interstellar civilization. The second was that they had yet to explore the endless cosmos and were still firmly bound to the ground by the planet's own gravity. The first was that they had completely disintegrated the original social structure and interest groups through the power of science and technology. They had also undergone genetic modification to ensure that there would be no problems internally. The second was that they were still in a state where several or even dozens of countries were fighting for resources and living space. It was impossible for them to unite. In comparison, Earth, which had touched the threshold of an interstellar civilization, seemed very special. It could even be said that it had considerable research value. On one hand, it still retained relatively backward concepts such as countries, religions, and ethnic groups. It even used war to achieve the goal of controlling resources and the economy. However, on the other hand, it had formed several large-scale joint organizations. There were also many proposals for a community with a shared future for humanity. The large countries used economic, political, military, and trade methods to unite even more small countries around them. Even as a ruler, Gru could not help but feel a strong curiosity about the complicated internal struggles and cooperation. He wanted to find out more. Zhang Cheng shrugged nonchalantly. That's right. Don't you think it's incredible? We call ourselves humans, and the planet that raised us is called Earth. It's a blue planet located in the Milky Way of the three-dimensional universe. It's very, very small, so small that almost all interstellar civilizations have overlooked it. Small? Ha ha. No. I think you've misunderstood the word small. Perhaps in the past, Earth was indeed a small and inconspicuous planet. However, ever since you and another ruler were born, it was no longer a nameless planet. It's a planet filled with legends. If you don't mind, can you bring me to take a look? The premise is that it hasn't been destroyed or hidden by you, Gru suggested with a laugh. Destroy or hide. Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise, because he didn't understand why the other party thought that he would do something so senseless. Oh, judging from your reaction, you haven't destroyed your home planet or hidden it. Jella's tone was filled with great astonishment. At the same time, he didn't forget to explain, you must understand that the moment all of us become rulers, we either have an extreme desire to sever all ties with the past, and the best way to do so is to destroy our own home planet, kill all life on it, and wipe out all traces of civilization. This way, the sovereign would be able to hide her past secrets and weaknesses forever, preventing others from using them to achieve unspeakable goals. In comparison, some rulers will hide their home planets in a private space where no one can find them, secretly protecting their home planets. I still don't understand. Why did the sovereign have to hide his past? Could it be that beings like us, who stand at the top of the universe, are still affected by those low-level emotions? Zhang Cheng asked with a frown. It's hard to say. You must understand that when we fuse with the main string, we are no longer who we used to be. To a certain extent, we represent the will of the universe. However, the universe is benevolent. It won't take away our emotions, so emotions still exist to a certain extent. Think about it. After you've lived for hundreds of millions of years, when you suddenly see the parents who gave birth to you and raised you suddenly appear, won't you feel emotional, nostalgic, and the urge to cry bitterly? Trust me, when you're old enough, you'll understand that our true enemy isn't each other, but loneliness and loneliness. When he said this, Jelu's insect-like eyes revealed a faint sadness. However, Zhang Cheng scoffed at this and shook his head with a cold smile. Sorry, I'm not as sentimental as you. In fact, before I became a ruler, I've already severed all ties with my past. Perhaps you won't believe it, but I've personally killed those I called friends and allies, and I can also send my treasured partner into the embrace of death without any hesitation. I've long viewed myself as a higher life form in the depths of my heart, and that backward mother planet is nothing to me. If someone wants to use this against me, I won't hesitate to snap the necks of those so-called family and friends. Then, I'll find a mastermind behind the scenes and use my own methods to make them pay the price. So, you don't mind if I go take a look at your mother planet? Jelu clearly didn't quite believe this and continued to carefully probe. Of course I don't mind. I've already told you the location, haven't I? Zhang Cheng asked back with a smile that wasn't a smile. All right, since that's the case, I'll make a trip there now. Goodbye, my friend. I wish you a fantastic start in this game. After saying this, Jelu shrunk his insect-like limbs into a shell. His entire protruding body suddenly tore open a spatial crack and entered it. His use of laws was so pure that he didn't even need accurate coordinates to freely travel between high-dimensional and low-dimensional universes. Looking at the spatial crack that rapidly opened and closed, Zhang Cheng muttered to himself with a look of disdain, Mother Planet? This sort of thing doesn't have any meaning to me at all, because on that planet, I'm just a lowly, ordinary person, someone at the bottom of society who barely survives by relying on wages. Even my disappearance and death won't cause any commotion. It's as ordinary as the surface of a calm lake, unable to cause any ripples at all. At the same time, Jelu, who had passed through the spatial crack, had already appeared at the outer edge of the solar system a few hours before Zhang Cheng disappeared. Through his own strength, he found that azure planet that was emitting signals of civilization without much effort. Without any hesitation, he crossed the distance that humans couldn't hope to reach with his fastest speed. He directly passed through the atmosphere and appeared in front of a bar's entrance. Through the glass window, he could clearly see Zhang Cheng, who still maintained the most ordinary human bloodline, sitting at a table and drinking with another unfamiliar man, occasionally complaining about various things. Chapter 1060. Gru felt an unprecedented resonance when he sensed the extremely complicated threads of fate that connected the bodies of ordinary lives. He had placed himself in a higher dimension in order to avoid being detected by the noisy crowd around him. It was as if he was observing the world inside a box through a layer of glass or a membrane. Normally speaking, he wouldn't be able to sense too many things. But now, There were so many threads of fate gathered above this bar that it was impossible to count them all. There were countless forks behind each of them. As a ruler, Gru had seen countless intelligent life forms that were either blessed by fate or cursed by fate. However, he had never seen one as complicated and changeable as this extremely ordinary human not far away. At a glance, he seemed to have endless possibilities. He didn't understand and couldn't comprehend why the most mysterious fate in the entire universe, which couldn't be measured by common sense, would be concentrated on a single life form in large numbers. It felt as if the will of the universe wanted to conduct an experiment to test if it was truly omnipotent. Just as this life form that looked extremely similar to a large beetle was deep in thought, Zhang Cheng, who was dead drunk in the bar, finally obtained the golden parchment scroll. He instantly vanished from where he was, leaving behind only his clothes, pants, shoes, cell phone, and wallet. The mysterious person sitting opposite him also turned into a ball of faint light particles, silently vanishing into an inconspicuous corner. Interesting. This is really too interesting. I can't believe that I'll be able to witness such an astonishing scene with my own eyes one day. What does this mean? Is this the beginning of a revolution for the entire universe? Or is this the prelude to its destruction? Gru mumbled to himself as he quickly disguised himself as a human and squeezed through the membrane. It was currently nighttime, and a large number of young men and women were entering and exiting the bar. No one noticed that a terrifying monster that could destroy Earth countless times had barged into their world. Of course, Gru wasn't too interested in these low-level life forms. He merely walked into the bar and went to the seat Zhang Cheng had been sitting at before he disappeared. He constantly searched for the threads of fate that were rapidly disappearing in an attempt to find some patterns. A few minutes later, he chased after the thread that he sensed the most intensely, traversing time and space to head to another parallel Earth. One didn't need to ask to know that this ruler was eager to observe Zhang Cheng's growth. He was eager to figure out what made an extremely ordinary intelligent life form embark on an extraordinary path that surpassed his own limits. What made her choose to completely sever herself from the past and even destroy a part of herself, forcing herself to become what she was now. At the same time, Zhang Cheng, who was on an unknown planet in a faraway corner of the universe, did not know that Gru had developed a strong interest in his past. He left the magic tower alone and appeared in a vast and desolate field. Under his feet, two armies belonging to different camps had already entered a state of confrontation, and a tragic war was about to break out. One of them had a golden lion flag, which was obviously the flag of the royal family. There was no need to ask. The kingdom had finally decided to send an army to clean up the rebellious western province after a political game. As for the other side, it was naturally Kerwin and his temporary motley crew. Just from the number of soldiers on the surface, there was not much difference between the two sides. The kingdom had mobilized a total of 40,000 infantrymen, 20,000 cavalrymen, 10,000 crossbowmen among the infantrymen, 1,500 catapults and ballistic troops, and 200 aerial elites riding on pterosaurs. Kerwin, on the other hand, had mobilized 60,000 infantrymen and 30,000 cavalrymen, 20,000 of which were crossbowmen, 3,000 of which were disposable and ballistic troops, and less than 50 of which were aerial elites. However, considering that the kingdom's army was 100% professional soldiers who had undergone strict training over a long period of time, and many of the veterans had participated in at least 5 wars, they could be said to be very experienced and had an absolute advantage in terms of quality. On the other hand, Kerwin's motley crew was the complete opposite. Excluding the professional soldiers who had been recruited after defeating other lords, most of them were civilians who had been forcibly recruited at the last minute. They were basically no different from grabbing, able-bodied men. Some of them were not even fully equipped with weapons and armor, and were still holding on to pitchforks used for farm work. While such an army had the advantage in numbers, their combat strength was abysmal. It would be better if they were fighting a smooth battle, but once they met with resistance or the battle reached a stalemate, they would completely collapse in a matter of minutes. They could not be compared to the veterans who had survived hundreds of battles. Of course, Kerwin did not place the weight of victory on these cannon fodder used to lure the enemy. Instead, he silently hid 20,000 magical golems in the bushes not far behind him. Once the commander of the royal army gave the order to launch an all-out attack, he would reveal this trump card and wipe out the enemy's effective forces in the shortest amount of time possible, so that the enemy would not be able to assemble a decent army to stop him from expanding outwards for the time being. That was right. From the very beginning, he had treated his entire human army as bait that was sprinkled with spices. It smelled fresh and delicious. He knew that the commander of the royal army must be like himself, eager to wipe out the enemy's main forces in the shortest time possible and ensure that the entire western province would no longer have any decent resistance. That way, the royal family would be able to regain their rule over this land. The nobles could also take the opportunity to arrange for their children to come over, putting on an active military service and obtaining a decent piece of land. For a powerful kingdom, the rebellion of the western province was nothing to them. In fact, in the hearts of a few ambitious people, not only was there no harm in this rebellion, there were even a series of benefits that could not be put into words. It was a golden opportunity for their family to expand. War, plunder, slaughter. Come, entertain me, lowly mortals. Use your blood and death to put on the most moving play for me. As Zhang Cheng muttered mockingly, the loud horn finally reverberated in the skies above the wilderness. Woo 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 dong, 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 dong. The neat formations of infantry began to march forward in large strides, following the beat of the war drums. The sharp tips of their spears flickered with a chilling golden light under the sunlight. The moment the frontmost soldiers from both sides collided, the deafening battle cries instantly ignited the killing instinct in their bones. Stab, stab, stab. Almost every time the sharp spears were thrust out, there would be a glaring splash of blood. Hundreds of soldiers fell to the ground, clutching their wounds. The lucky ones who were stabbed in the heart, throat, eyes, and other vital parts barely felt any pain before they breathed their last. The unlucky ones struggled for a while, either being stabbed by the enemy who rushed up or fainting from excessive blood loss, going into shock, and finally dying. Chapter 1061. Admiring the bloody scene below, Zhang Cheng couldn't help but smile and sigh. Ah, how wonderful! There's nothing more pleasurable than the release of primitive and barbaric instincts and desires. Laws, ethics, and morals are all shackles that a small number of individuals put on people's minds in order to build a stable and exploitative society. It's just like how a lie becomes the truth after being told 1,000 times. It's just a disguised form of brainwashing and deception to make more people accept a reality that's disadvantageous to them. It hinders the evolution and development of individuals, and it also hinders the survival of the fittest within the entire race. The universe should be chaotic and disorderly, not a stable form built on rights, resources, and bloodlines. Obviously, with the loss of a large number of lives, the omnipresent rules of death gathered unprecedentedly. At the same time, an extremely distorted and indescribable energy surrounded him. It was obvious that this was the power of chaos. It originated from the birth of the universe, and was also the power that led to the end of the universe's destruction. Chaos represented disorder, unpredictability, and limitless possibilities. In theory, nothing could surpass chaos because it was the cornerstone of the birth of the entire universe and the ancestor of countless existing rules. But what was interesting was that this power didn't obey anyone. It couldn't be built and used according to a certain pattern like how other powers were controlled. It was like a card that hadn't been opened yet. It was impossible to know if it would be a king or a clown after it was opened. Normally, Zhang Cheng, who liked absolute control, should hate the uncertainty of the power of chaos the most. But the reality was the complete opposite. Not only did he feel the true essence of power and the greatness of the birth of the universe from chaos, but he also felt an unprecedented sense of identity. Powerful, mysterious, full of unknowns. Compared to the order formed after the birth of the universe, chaos was undoubtedly more attractive. But regrettably, the mortals fighting on the plains below didn't realize that their selfless slaughter wasn't as advertised by the nobles. They weren't doing it to protect the dignity and land of the great kingdom from being invaded by hostile forces. Instead, they were doing it to satisfy the interests of a certain powerful being. It was a dispensable game and experiment. War. It was always an extremely selfish behavior. If they won, the ruling class would benefit. But if they lost, the majority of the ordinary people would have to bear the consequences. Almost all intelligent life forms in the universe essentially occupied the resources they needed to survive, reproduce, and expand through killing and plundering. The only difference was that the civilizations that entered the interstellar era plundered outer space resources, while the civilizations that were still bound by gravity to their mother planet could only plunder each other. As for the so-called equal trade, in essence, it was the plundering of inferior civilizations by a stronger civilization. They used high value-added products formed through the accumulation of technology in exchange for important raw materials that the other party could not use at this stage. On the surface, it seemed like a deal between both parties, but behind the scenes, the weaker civilizations did not have the right to refuse. Some of them didn't care about their reputation and face at all. They might even skip the trade and send troops to occupy the raw material production areas. They might even use the local natives as free slaves. Looking at the crumbling infantry formation, Baron Kellenst couldn't help but ask, "My lord, our front lines can't hold on much longer. Don't you think?" "Don't worry, my good Baron. I was waiting for the entire front line to collapse. Otherwise, how could the enemy be at ease enough to order an all-out attack? I need a victory, a complete one, to secure at least half of the kingdom's territory. If the deaths of tens of thousands of cannon fodder can be exchanged for that, I think it's worth it." Kerwin pursed his lips into a cold and cruel smile. Would a tyrant care about the lives of his soldiers? How could that be? The army was a consumable to him, a tool to fulfill his ambitions and desires. Compared to the human soldiers that could easily break down and rebel, the magic golems and monsters that would obey orders 100% were the true trump cards he could rely on. The only regret was that these perfect tools didn't belong to him in the end. To be more precise, Kerwin only had the right to command and use them. The moment he lost the support of his master, everything before him would be for naught. It was precisely because of this that he was so anxious to quickly defeat the kingdom and establish a sufficiently stable political system to ensure that he would not be casually abandoned like trash. "I see. I understand now. Since you're so bold, why don't you let me lead the cavalry in a charge before retreating completely in front of the infantry formation? That way, the morale of the soldiers who are still holding on will definitely be shaken, and they'll fall into chaos and panic. They'll be completely defeated in 2 to 3 minutes," Baron Kellen said with a smile, revealing his pearly white teeth. "Hee, you want to attack our morale? You really are a genius, Baron. All right, I agree with your plan. But be careful. Cavalry is a precious resource. I'm still counting on them to chase after us and not lose too many," Kerwin reminded meaningfully. "Understood." Baron Kellenst patted his chest, put on his helmet, and rode his horse towards the cavalry formation that was ready to set off. Under his command, the cavalry that had been waiting for a long time tightened their armor and arranged themselves into an assault formation. They began to jog and accelerate slowly from the back. After a short while, they charged towards the side of the infantry formation like a stormy sea. The kingdom's cavalry also noticed that and moved to intercept them at almost the same time. In large-scale battles like this, there were no shortcuts. It was basically infantry versus infantry, cavalry versus cavalry. The only thing that could be used was time. Whoever could make good use of the time difference between different units will be able to catch the enemy off guard and use that to expand their advantage and secure victory. Cavalry versus cavalry. There were no fancy tricks involved. Both sides were like tens of thousands of speeding cars crashing into each other. Countless unlucky fellows fell off their horses and broke their necks. Some were even more unlucky and were trampled into meat paste by their comrades. Even their sturdy armor couldn't withstand the powerful limbs of their warhorses. Due to their helmets, their hearing was severely affected. Coupled with the noisy environment of the battlefield, most cavalry couldn't hear their commanders' orders the moment they entered the fray. The only thing they could do was to advance. Advance, even further, until they died or pierced through the enemy. Chapter 1062. Those who hadn't seen tens of thousands of cavalrymen charging at each other would never be able to imagine the shock it brought. Not only was it a strong visual impact, but there was also the deafening sound of hooves and the ground shaking. The moment the cavalrymen clashed, everything around them seemed to freeze. The next second, one of the cavalrymen would be impaled by the pike of another, sending him flying off his horse before crashing heavily to the ground. It was the most blood-boiling scene in the era of cold weapons. It was also a game where the brave gambled their lives on the line. At this moment, the boundary between life and death was less than a second away. Regrettably, after a short clash, Baron Kalenst led his men in a huge circle and ran back to the forest not far behind. He was so resolute that he didn't care about the looks of despair on the faces of the infantry. Most of them were forced conscriptions and were poorly trained. They had already fought with a small number of veterans for more than half an hour against enemies far stronger than them. Their casualties were 2 to 3 times more than the enemy's. The only reason they could hold on until now was because of their fear of the tyrant. Kerwin had threatened them that if any of them dared to turn and run, not only would they be executed, their loved ones would suffer as well. But now, as the cavalrymen scattered in all directions, the last shred of morale was quickly drained away. The soldiers who had lost all hope of victory either threw their weapons away and knelt down in surrender or ran madly into the forest. Within a distance of less than 1 kilometer, thousands of unlucky fellows were caught up and killed by the enemy cavalry. Dark red blood dyed the ground red. Every few steps, one would see corpses with their eyes wide open, revealing the fear of death. Pursue. All troops pursue. Kill every last one of these rebels. The commander of the kingdom's army yelled as he drew his sword, his face flushed red. According to common sense, there was no chance of a comeback in a situation like this. It was the best chance to take advantage of the situation. Nobody would have thought that such a terrifying killing intent was hidden in the dense forest. But soon, the commanding officer paid a heavy and fatal price for his order. The moment the 200 or so cavalrymen approached the forest with bloodshot eyes, 3 gigantic steel golems charged out and flung them into the air. The killing machines, fixed to their arms, chopped them into pieces in less than 2 seconds. Broken limbs and innards splattered everywhere. It was a shocking sight. Damn it, what's that? One of the cavalrymen hurriedly reined in his horse and stared at the glowing silver object tens of meters away. Size was always the first standard for most intelligent beings to judge their strength. Being large meant that they had great vitality and were hard to kill. It also meant that they could easily lift hundreds of kilograms or even tons of things to use as weapons. I don't know, but I think we'd better hide as far away as possible. That's right. I don't want to fight against these steel giants. Disperse. Disperse. Stop the pursuit. Amidst the chaos, more and more steel golems left the cover of the forest and strode towards the enemies closest to them, starting a frenzied slaughter. They were like grim reapers, reaping the flesh and lives of their enemies without restraint. Even if they were hit by a boulder thrown from a catapult, the most they would suffer was a slight disfigurement of their limbs. They would quickly get up and continue their work. At the same time, the monsters with a trace of rule-bending power in their bodies were not to be outdone. They used their unparalleled speed and agility to flank the enemy from both sides, directly surrounding the enemy's infantry formation. In just a few minutes, the offensive and defensive positions had undergone a 180-degree reversal. Admiring the arrogant royal army not long ago, Kelvin cracked a bloodthirsty smile and ordered without turning his head, "Charge! Kill them all. Remember, I don't need captives, nor do I need ransom. I want the royal family to bleed." "As you wish, sir," Baron Kellenst put down his visor and shouted to the eager cavalry behind him, "Brave warriors! The time for revenge has come. Come, let's bring fear and death to our arrogant enemies. We are fear and death. Charge!" With the sharp neigh of war horses, the traps set up beforehand finally closed in. Even though tens of thousands of the kingdom's veterans resisted and tried to fight for a chance to negotiate, they were not ordinary soldiers. They were facing a group of steel golems that were invulnerable to swords and spears, as well as monsters that did not know what fear was and only knew to obey orders. In less than 10 minutes, more than a third of the soldiers were lying in pools of blood. Their corpses had been gnawed or dismembered beyond recognition. The nightmarish feeling caused many of the remaining soldiers to break down. A small number of them would rather commit suicide than let the enemy get close to them. They're done for. Congratulations, my dear friend. You've obtained a glorious victory. At the same time, half of the kingdom's land has lost its ability to defend itself. You're like a weak young girl, and all you need to do is give a gentle push and you'll obtain everything you dream of. Isolde praised his allies as his gaze lingered on the spellcaster army that hadn't made a move since the beginning. They didn't have many people, numbering less than 50 in total. However, anyone who had some understanding of the spellcaster army would know that once these less than 50 people unleashed their full strength, their destructive power would be even more terrifying than that of an elite army of 10,000 people. Oomph. Victory? No. This isn't a victory that belongs to me. It belongs to Master. Also, don't you think it's a little too early to celebrate? Kerwin laughed coldly, a vicious glint in his eyes. Oh, you've noticed the spellcaster army that hasn't made a move since the beginning? Isolde raised an eyebrow in surprise. The way he saw it, this ambitious fellow of ordinary birth shouldn't have such sharp intuition and corresponding knowledge. This was because in the relatively desolate Western province, there were simply not enough spellcasters who were powerful enough to form an army. The lords here had also never seen the spectacular scene of a large number of spellcasters gathering together to chant spells. Chapter 1063. Perhaps I lack vision and knowledge, but that doesn't mean I'm an idiot. Any rational ruler would not turn a blind eye to the power hidden in the weak bodies of the spellcasters. Tell me, are you confident in dealing with them? Kerwin narrowed his eyes and probed. This was not only to test the strength of the enemy's spellcaster army, but also to see if this ally before him was worth the effort to rope in. In most countries and relatively wealthy regions in this world, regardless of whether the ruler liked it or not, they would nurture or rope in a spellcaster to be their advisor or advisor. On one hand, they would be responsible for strategizing, and, on the other hand, they would prevent the invasion of magical power. This was both a tradition and an art of political compromise, by giving the spellcaster trust and power in exchange for their loyalty. Every ruler knew that this kind of loyalty was very limited, not to mention sacrificing one's life for the employer. Even the slightest bit of danger would immediately disappear. But no matter what, having a spellcaster and not having a spellcaster were two completely different concepts. The former would not be able to do much when faced with the threat of magical power, while the latter would be able to intimidate some enemies who were scheming and plotting against them just by being in name. It was obvious that Kerwin was in a state where he did not have a spellcaster to swear allegiance to him. Whether it was Isolde and the others who controlled the spellcaster guild, or the merchant's son who looked down on him from the bottom of his heart, they were not listening to Zhang Cheng's orders. Both sides were in fact equal positions, and there was no such thing as who was subordinate to whom. However, as an ambitious tyrant, he longed for a group of spellcasters who would listen to his orders. Perhaps Isolde would not swear allegiance to him, but that did not mean that his subordinates and apprentices could not. The old man undoubtedly knew what Kerwin was planning. He replied with a faint smile, "Don't worry, I've already made the necessary arrangements." In front of the vast knowledge bestowed by Master, the enemy's laughable magic won't even have a chance to be unleashed. If they dare to chant a spell, I guarantee that it will be the last time they make a sound from their throats. Sounds interesting. I'll wait and see. Kerwin stroked the thick beard on his chin, a hint of playfulness flashing in his eyes. This is our responsibility, and at the same time, our duty. Isolt pretended to bow slightly, then returned to the group of spellcasters and gave a look to his other two companions. The latter quickly led his apprentices into a circle, then gently cut his finger and let the blood drip at his feet. In the blink of an eye, a dark red light followed the circle, continuously drawing symbols that emitted a strong aura of evil. When the last symbol was completed, the entire sky suddenly darkened. It was as if there was a pair of eyes hidden in the thick black clouds, looking down at all life from a high position. Oh my God! What is this? Is this an evil summoning ritual? The highest commander of the kingdom's army couldn't help but gasp. After all, the current situation of being surrounded by enemies was already bad enough. If some evil magic ritual were to be carried out, then none of them would be able to survive, let alone leave safely through negotiations and ransom. Your Excellency, L. This is an extremely powerful and evil magic ritual. I don't know what it's used for, but once it's activated, it'll definitely cause an alarming number of casualties. An old man in a red robe reminded with a serious expression. Magic ritual? Damn it. These rebels who live in the magic desert all year round actually found enough spellcasters to form an army? The middle-aged man called the Count's voice was filled with disbelief and absurdity. In his eyes, this rebellion should only be a happy journey to earn military merits, glory, and reputation. The Western Province, which had always been backward, didn't have the strength to resist the elites from the central region of the kingdom. But now, a nightmare had become a cruel reality. Just as the old man in the red robe was about to say something, the dark clouds in the sky suddenly emitted a strange red light. The next second, boom, black lightning fell from the sky, landing in the middle of the kingdom's defensive formation with a loud bang. More than 30 spellcasters instantly fell into a state of incomparable madness. Some of them began to release the most powerful destructive spells that they had mastered. The chaos caused in just a few minutes was comparable to the total number of casualties caused by the tens of thousands of cavalrymen chasing after them. What was more terrifying was that their affinity with magical energy increased by more than 3 to 5 times when they fell into a frenzy. The power and number of spells released were also more powerful than usual. Those who were lucky enough to escape the disaster couldn't stop it at all. Accompanied by the deafening sound of thunder that reverberated in the sky above the battlefield, red rain that was like blood covered the sky and drowned the kingdom's army. Those who accidentally let the rain into their eyes, noses, and mouths began to attack their companions like the spellcasters before them. Some parts of their bodies even mutated. Standing in the sky and looking at the chaotic scene below, the corners of Zhang Cheng's mouth curled up slightly. He muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Feel the power of chaos. It's the origin of the universe. It's the beginning and end of all matter and energy. Today, I'll use your blood and soul to plant the seed of chaos, and then let it take root and sprout on this planet. Finally, it'll grow into a towering tree that belongs only to me." As soon as he finished speaking, he raised his right hand and resonated with the awakening and boiling power of chaos below. In just a short while, crazy thoughts quickly spread among the mortals. There was nothing that could stop this primal impulse. The individual's willpower that was almost mythical was like a dam built of sand in the face of chaos. It would collapse with a slight impact. The soldiers who had fallen into chaos had lost all rationality. Some of them killed their companions, some tortured and abused themselves, while others lay on the ground and tore at the corpses with big mouthfuls, swallowing pieces of bloody flesh and innards into their stomachs. There was nothing that these people wouldn't do that you couldn't imagine. The power of chaos was so terrifying that some of Kerwin's subordinates were beginning to be affected. They were emitting a crazy aura from head to toe. Chapter 1064. Chaos is disorder. It's the fusion of chaos and madness. It's irrational and unpredictable thoughts and actions. Now, I'll use the lives and souls of these mortals to nurture the seed of chaos until the day it sprouts. With a whisper that only he could hear, Zhang Cheng gathered the mad souls of all the dead natives and injected them into the blood-soaked ground. Not long after, a dark red substance began to slowly gather under the surface. Although it was very weak, it still caused an irreversible effect on this land. Looking at the twisted trees, vines, and weeds, it was clear that the power of chaos had changed their way of growth. In a few months' time, countless new species would appear here, and it would gradually become a forbidden zone for civilization. This was because chaos was the opposite of order, and civilization symbolized order. Civilization could only be born and developed under a certain order. Such a strange change caused Kerwin to feel an inexplicable sense of panic and fear. He couldn't care less about enjoying the fruits of victory, and hurriedly ordered the slaughter of the remnants of the kingdom's army that had lost their will to fight. He then took the spoils and quickly retreated. It had to be said that although he couldn't sense the changes in energy himself, his sixth sense was very sharp. Otherwise, if those ordinary soldiers stayed in such an environment for a while longer, they would most likely not be able to resist killing each other, or do some strange things that couldn't be explained with common sense. They would eventually be completely assimilated and become complete lunatics. After watching Kerwin and his subordinates retreat from the battlefield and return to the rear camp to rest and recuperate, Zhang Cheng returned to the magic tower alone and checked the data he had collected today. As this was the first time the monsters created by the laws had participated in a large-scale battle, he had obtained a lot of valuable data. Through simple analysis, comparison, and summary, he quickly discovered that life and nature were the weakest among all the monsters he had created, not even half as strong as death. On the other hand, the elemental attribute was the most mediocre. It was neither too strong nor too weak. Its only characteristic was that it was stable and easy to control. This might have something to do with the fact that he had been a spellcaster for a long time. As for the last, and also the strongest, it was naturally death, destruction, and annihilation. Not only could Zhang Qing easily and skillfully use any law with such attributes, but he would also receive an inexplicable feedback when he used it. It was as if there was a mysterious source encouraging and praising him. After realizing this, he quickly activated the special communication tool that Gru had given him. In the next second, the opponent's semicircular insect-like head suddenly appeared in the room on the top floor of the tower in a half-illusory, half-solid state. Gru first scanned the surroundings to make sure that there were no unrelated people around before asking in an uncertain tone, "You're looking for me?" Zhang Cheng nodded without hesitation. "Of course. I would like to ask you some questions about controlling the Dominator's power, as well as questions related to chaos. Is it convenient for you right now?" I'm sorry, but I can't do it now. If you don't mind, can I take the initiative to look for you in a few days?" Gru hesitated for a moment and finally proposed another plan. "No problem." Zhang Cheng immediately agreed, not noticing the hesitation in the other party's eyes and tone. "See you in a few days then. Goodbye." As the communication tool was quickly turned off, the half-solid projection in front of the other party instantly collapsed, turning into countless high-energy particles that flickered in the air before finally dimming. Gru heaved a sigh of relief as he stared at the hundreds of millions of golden specks that filled the air. He chuckled softly as he muttered to himself. Fortunately, he didn't discover that I was spying on his past and his growth. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened? Just as he finished speaking, he casually put away the communication tool and once again disguised himself as a human. He strode into a small restaurant and went to the kitchen as if there was no one else around, admiring the young man in his work uniform who was squatting in front of the sink and washing dishes. To be precise, this young man was Zhang Cheng, who had just been saved by the desire which Catherine not long ago. Though he still looked so ordinary, his entire body was already emitting a cold aura that kept people away. No sympathy, no pity, not even the slightest sense of acknowledgement. It was as if a layer of membrane had formed around him, completely isolating him from the outside world. He rejected integration from the bottom of his heart. Without a doubt, this was a rather inconceivable change. Gru had observed the humans on Earth before and understood that they were an intelligent species that had a contradictory mix of social and animal natures. On one hand, they were jealous and desired to abandon their animal natures and deal with problems in a purely rational manner. They had desires that they could not completely restrain. Whenever their brains were dominated by their desires, they would often make extremely foolish and unreasonable mistakes. On the other hand, they were bound by their social nature. They could not be like real animals and completely do what they wanted to do. They were firmly bound by something called law and morality. As a member of society, most humans had to abide by the so-called rules and consensus to ensure that they would not be isolated and unable to survive. This also meant that whether it was due to their animal natures or their social nature, humans could not choose to leave the group and live alone. This was a species that needed to be united in order to survive and develop. After thousands of years of evolution, a portion of this had already been integrated into their genes and passed down from generation to generation. But now, an anomaly had appeared. He refused to integrate into society. He even refused to integrate into this world. He treated himself as an independent individual and used an extremely cold attitude to observe everything that was both foreign and familiar to him. Gru felt that perhaps it was this change that allowed Zhang Cheng to finally walk on the path to becoming a ruler. In order to further confirm his speculation, he had been changing his disguise every day and every hour while observing Zhang Cheng's every move. Even the slightest emotional fluctuations and changes in facial expressions would be recorded in full detail. Then, when he was free, he would carry out complicated analysis and comparison. Just as the saying went, nothing in the world was difficult for those who set their mind to it. Gru finally discovered a pattern during this process of tracking and observation. That was when Zhang Cheng came to this world, a very important part of his soul had disappeared. Chapter 1065. So that's how it is. This isn't just his problem. There's someone hiding behind the scenes who did this. Galu muttered to himself, his 12 eyes flickering with the same light. He had long known that the whole thing was actually a conspiracy. A sinister and cunning person had meticulously set up a trap in order to steal the power of the Dominator. However, he had never expected that the other party would be so sinister as to tamper with the soul. The reason he used the word steal was not that Galu hated the person who called himself the Initiator. Instead, he did not think that devouring his parallel universe self and causing the string to vibrate to create a new main string was the correct way to become a Dominator. This was because an artificially created main string was not as stable as a naturally formed main string. Furthermore, it was filled with danger and uncertainty. Once it failed, the negative impact and damage to the universe would be even more fatal than destroying hundreds or thousands of huge galaxies. Most importantly, this kind of damage could not be repaired or reversed. Once it was formed, it would mean that the laws of the entire universe would change. Fortunately, the Initiator did not fail in the end. Not only did he not fail, but he also succeeded in one try. Of course, as a price, countless parallel universes of his had been exhausted. Only an accident that was not part of the plan had survived. Not only had it survived, but it had also become a professional life form that stood at the peak of the universe's evolution, a Dominator. Galu was now eager to know where the part of Zhang Cheng's soul that he had lost had gone. Had he realized it later on? If he had, why had he not taken it back? With even more questions and curiosity, he continued to shuttle through the smallest nodes of time, pursuing the trajectory of fate. At the same time, at the end of the distant universe, the Initiator was sitting in front of a round table. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the giant who was emitting golden light not far away. He did not hide the hatred in his heart at all. Similarly, the other party did not hide his emotions either. He pursed his lips into a playful smile and took the initiative to ask, "Why? Are you dissatisfied with me?" Dissatisfied? No, I'm not dissatisfied with you. It's hatred, an unforgettable hatred. I'll never forget what you and your subordinates did to my hometown, the initiator replied coldly. Ah, I'm sorry. I've conquered too many planets and galaxies. I can't remember how many civilizations I've destroyed, especially the backward civilizations in the lower three-dimensional universe. The giant of light deliberately pretended to be playful, as if he wanted to achieve some unspeakable purpose through stimulation. Unfortunately, this trick was useless against the meticulous initiators. He merely sneered and chose to shut his mouth, ignoring the other party's provocation. This was because he knew that even though he was already a sovereign, in terms of absolute power, he was absolutely no match for these veteran sovereigns. If he couldn't stand the humiliation and provocation and made the first move, then he would be the one to suffer. Oomph. Coward. Seeing that the initiator was ignoring him, the giant of light mocked, but he did not say anything else. It was clear that he was none other than the master behind the scenes of the Pagoda Alliance Empire, the madman who had proclaimed himself emperor. That was right. He was a lunatic. He tried to use pure violence to destroy all the planets in the universe that did not follow the absolute order to establish a civilization, and then transform them according to his will. However, this kind of modification usually came at the cost of destroying more than 90% of the lives, as well as the original civilization system. Not only would the survivors not be grateful, but they would also hate him from the bottom of their hearts. But the interesting thing was that this sovereign did not care at all. He only had one goal, which was to completely destroy the chaos attribute in the universe and sprinkle the light of order in every corner. Just as the atmosphere in this space that was emitting light and heat became more and more tense, another round ball of light suddenly descended from the sky and said in a solemn and steady voice, "Very good. I'm glad that you didn't fight. You must know that we are all members of order. We must maintain the universe from falling into chaos and chaos. If the two of you are still fighting over old grievances, not only will it weaken the power of order, but it will also increase the arrogance of chaos. Do you know? I just received the latest news that another newly promoted sovereign has shown strong chaos tendencies. Now, I need someone to make contact with him and see if we can rope him in. Leave it to me. I have the most experience in dealing with this kind of newcomer." The giant of light stood up and proposed. But before the ball of light could react, the initiator also stood up and said, "Leave it to me. You should know that this guy had a conflict with the organization I founded in the past. Him going will only be counterproductive. But I'm different. He and I are unified entities from different parallel universes, and there is a connection between us. Oh, I know that the two of you came from parallel universes of the three-dimensional universe and became sovereigns at the same time. But what makes you think that you can persuade him?" The ball of light clearly flickered, and there was a trace of doubt in its tone. "Only you know yourself the best. He and I are essentially the same kind of people. Even if we don't agree with each other's choices, we can understand each other's thoughts. Under this premise, only we can establish a bond of trust with each other, and only then can we further communicate and negotiate. Believe me, he is a pragmatist and won't be too attached to factions." The initiator explained confidently. "Fool, you think the choice of factions is based on benefits? No, it is every sovereign's deepest understanding of the universe, and it is an acknowledgement that can't be described with words. Only when you acknowledge it from the bottom of your heart can you obtain power from it, supreme power, and then decide the final direction of the universe." The giant of light retorted mercilessly, "I don't want to argue with you pointlessly. If you don't want to believe that I can succeed, then let the results speak for themselves." The initiator swept his cold gaze across the other party, and then looked at the ball of light not far away. The ball of light was clearly hesitating, and after a long silence, it said, "All right, I can give you this chance, but you must understand that if you fail, you will have to accept a rather severe punishment. This is the essence of order, and it is a rule that every sovereign must abide by. Understood? If I fail, I am willing to accept the punishment." After saying this, the initiator turned around and went through a portal without looking back, disappearing without a trace. Chapter 1066. Kelvin spent less than 2 days on the same spot to recuperate after wiping out most of the troops sent by the kingdom. Then, he split his troops into 3 groups and launched an all-out attack at the speed of a wildfire, taking advantage of the fact that the enemy did not have time to react. In just half a month, more than a third of the country's most prosperous land had fallen into his control. It was no different from what he did in the Western Province. He mercilessly killed off the nobles who originally held the ruling position, then pulled in and supported the forces that were originally suppressed to the front to maintain law and order, tax collection, and other basic functions of the government. It had to be said that this was a rather dangerous method. Although these forces were suppressed by the nobles, they might not be willing to swear loyalty to a tyrant. They would only temporarily submit to the powerful military force. Once they had the chance, they would definitely start a rebellion, return to the kingdom through negotiations, or choose to govern themselves. All in all, the rapid expansion might have been an out-and-out victory in terms of military power, but in terms of politics, economy, and society, it was a helpless compromise. It did not destroy the original distribution of interests and wealth, but only took the part that originally belonged to the royal family. This hidden danger would become more and more serious with the passage of time, eventually leading to a series of terrible and disastrous consequences. But interestingly, Kerwin did not seem to care about this at all. The rapid advancement of the 3 armies at a speed that the enemy could not imagine gave him an inexplicable conceit, and he believed that the word failure would never appear in his dictionary. There were a total of 20,000 killing machines of steel and thousands of monsters that could cast all kinds of magic from the rear. He did not even know if there was any powerful country on this continent that could defeat such a terrifying army in a direct battle. Coupled with the human soldiers that had been trained for a long time, Kerwin had enough power to support his expanding ambition and establish a country that completely belonged to him. As long as these armies were still there, he believed that no one would dare to betray him, or they would face terrible revenge. But what he did not know was that on the other side of the sea, a terrible change was happening in a small island kingdom. In the deepest part of the dark sewers, oval-shaped metal eggs hatched quickly. In just a few weeks, countless insects the size of rice grains were born. Under the cover of the night, these insects quietly sneaked into the homes of the residents. Through parasitic manipulation, they unknowingly occupied nearly 1/5 of the population. With their innate ability, they could easily identify which ones were parasitized by their own kind and which were not. In the end, they joined forces and began to fight for power. Almost all the cities and towns on the island were in conflict. Even a fool could feel the tension in the air. Some smart people realized that something was wrong and immediately took their families and tried to escape to other countries by boat. However, almost every ship that left the port would return that night, and the people who escaped would settle down again as if they had changed into another person, as if they had abandoned their previous desire to escape. Needless to say, they had all been parasitized on the ship. To be more precise, the unique life forms that Gru created were using their own methods to isolate the island kingdom from the outside world. Unless they completed their population annexation plan, they would never appear before the world. However, once they came into contact with the outside world, it would mean war, plunder, and annexation. As a species that relied entirely on parasitism to survive, the meaning of their existence was to parasitize all intelligent life on the planet. They would use the other party's entry into the interstellar era to expand crazily without caring about the cost, until they alerted certain advanced civilizations and wiped them out completely. From a certain perspective, these little insects were Gru's understanding of chaos, as well as his unique way of expressing it. Just as Zhang Cheng was observing through the magic mirror how these little bugs infiltrated the civilized society step by step, how they fought for power bit by bit, and how they finally gained control of the entire country, he suddenly felt a familiar energy tear through space, crossing countless spaces and dimensions and appearing in the attic at the top of the tower out of thin air. As the other party did not seem to be used to such a complicated method of teleportation, it did not control it well and tore a huge hole in the roof. On the other side of the hole was not the blue sky, but the layer between dimensions. It was also a terrifying place where matter and energy were extremely chaotic and unable to form a stable state. Oh, damn it. I seem to have damaged your tower. Accompanied by an incomparably familiar voice, the initiator walked out with an apologetic smile on his face. He looked so calm, as if the two of them were good friends who could talk about anything, and there had never been any unpleasantness between them. But in reality, the two of them had almost turned hostile in order to seize the opportunity to become a ruler. Even though the two of them had found their own way in the end, that thorn had been planted deep in their hearts, and they would never be able to trust each other again. How did you know I was here? Zhang Cheng subconsciously frowned. He did not dare to believe it. In order to avoid those malicious gazes, he had hidden on a planet located in a remote corner of the universe, but someone had still managed to find his whereabouts. It must be known that Gru had found him by accident, and it was mostly luck. However, the initiator had used precise positioning to teleport right in front of him. This also meant that the coordinates of the tower had been exposed to the vision of almost all the rulers. The initiator placed one hand on his chest and bowed slightly, replying in a slightly sincere voice, "I'm sorry, I can't give you a clear answer on this point because even I am not too sure. It is very presumptuous of me to visit you without prior notice. But please believe me, what we are about to discuss is beneficial to both you and me. Oh, as far as I know, the last time you told a similar lie, you slaughtered everyone in the organization except for me." Zhang Cheng deliberately sneered and mocked. "No, this is different from the last time. This time, it is not even me who is in charge, but some other great beings." The initiator shook his head, his tone full of hidden meaning. Chapter 1067. Great existences? Are you referring to the rulers of the Order faction? Zhang Cheng asked with a faint smile. Without a doubt, he saw through the little trick that the originator used to maintain a sense of mystery. When he first joined the organization, he noticed that everyone around him seemed to have been hypnotized to some extent. To be more precise, they were lying to themselves. By creating a sense of mystery, the originator made everyone mistakenly believe that he was omnipotent and omniscient. He even knew the secrets hidden in the deepest parts of the universe. The result was that he successfully deceived everyone. In the end, only Zhang Cheng was lucky enough to survive. Of course, it wasn't all luck. A large part of it was Zhang Cheng, who didn't believe in anyone other than himself. That's right. They call themselves the Order faction. They intend to establish absolute order and ensure that the entire universe operates according to a stable law. How about it? Are you interested in joining us? I guarantee that as long as you and I work together, it won't take long for us to climb above their heads and completely control this faction. The originator straightforwardly expressed his intentions. Zhang Cheng smiled and shook his head. My answer is no. Compared to the dull and boring order, I obviously prefer the infinite possibilities of chaos. You haven't experienced the majestic and vast power of chaos. You don't understand that this is the ultimate manifestation of the entire universe. Chaos is the source of order. All order originates from the very beginning of chaos. Haven't you noticed? The so-called main string is actually the manifestation of the universe's laws. Even it shows strong signs of chaos. Why should I give up what's near and seek what's far away and join order? You really think that chaos is the source? The universe will return to chaos in the end? The originator raised his eyebrows in surprise. That's right. At least before I find enough evidence to overturn it, I will seriously experience the essence of chaos. I'm willing to be its spokesperson in the universe. As for your boring power struggle, you can play by yourself. I'm not interested in it at all. Zhang Cheng rejected him without holding back. Join the Order faction? What a joke. What kind of organization was the Order faction? They were a group of lunatics who valued order more than anything else. They even had a strict hierarchy internally. There was no such thing as equality. In the eyes of these fellows, hierarchy was the ultimate manifestation of order. Therefore, they had to set an example. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the right to understand the true essence of order. In comparison, the Chaos faction was much better. At least on the surface, all the rulers had equal status. Usually, they wouldn't force rulers to do things they didn't want to do. After all, chaos symbolized disorder. It meant that the order rulers could do whatever they wanted without any restrictions. It was much easier than the order faction. However, everything has a good side and a bad side. The biggest problem with staying in the Chaos faction was that there was no telling when a ruler would suddenly attack their allies. There was no other way. Calm. In response to Zhang Cheng's straightforward rejection, the initiator's expression immediately became a little unsightly. He narrowed his eyes and threatened, "Are you sure you don't want to reconsider? You have to know that this matter concerns your future, even your life and death. It won't be long before a great war breaks out. When the time comes, you'll realize that order is far stronger than chaos. A motley crew won't be able to defeat a united elite. Thank you for your concern, but I still insist on my choice. Also, I hope that you won't appear again. Although from a certain standpoint, you are me and I am you, from the moment I became a ruler, the very essence of our lives changed forever. That feeling of resonance with each other completely disappeared. From now on, you are you and I am me. There's no need to pretend that we're familiar with each other." Zhang Cheng didn't hold back at all. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't know how to kill a ruler, he would definitely kill this man and try to use some forbidden methods to devour him and gain more power. Very well. I hope you won't regret your choice. Also, don't think that I can't deal with you just because you've become a ruler. On the contrary, I'll always have more trump cards in my hands than you can imagine. After leaving behind these threatening words, the initiator walked through the crack with a gloomy face and returned to the entrance of the Order Council. He wasn't in a hurry to report back to the light cluster. Instead, he took out the soul fragment he had cut off from Zhang Cheng's body from his pocket, gritted his teeth, and sneered, "I will never forget this humiliation. Just you wait. It won't be long before I let you taste the taste of failure and pain. This time, I won't kill you. Instead, I'll transform you into the most obedient tool, a loyal dog and servant who listens to my every command." Calm down. Don't let anger control your emotions. Your current state isn't very stable. You might lose your subjective consciousness and become a puppet of the rules. In the blink of an eye, the man wearing glasses walked out from the corner. His tone revealed a strong warning. It was clear that this person who had helped the initiator design countless plans and finally became the highest life form in the universe, the ruler, had also joined the Order Council. His position was even higher than the initiator's. As for the reason, it was very simple. It was his genius brain that allowed a mortal to successfully reach the top. Although the process was very complicated and full of dangers, success was still success. Even if there was only one case, it meant that it was a research direction. Perhaps some scheming fellows had already begun to use this method behind the scenes to create masters that would obey their orders out of thin air. In fact, many madmen had researched using artificial interference to create a ruler. Currently, the most successful one was the Pagoda Alliance's hero. However, Hero could only use less than 1/10,000th of the mainstream's power. He didn't escape the fate of being a high-level consumable and cannon fodder. Calm down? How can I calm down? You should know very well that if I fail, not only will people laugh at me, they will also hit me when I'm down. Do you know? Every time I see that bastard, I have the urge to choke him to death. My friend, you better hurry up and find a way to kill a ruler. Otherwise, one day, I might lose control and start a fight in the council. I know. I'll speed up the research. That's for the best. I still have to report. So I won't accompany you to do those boring data analysis and comparisons. Take care. I hope your punishment won't be too severe. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1068. Master, what happened just now? This place seems to have been severely damaged. Lawrence had entered the room on the top floor at some point, and he stared at the huge hole in the ceiling with his mouth agape. As the only apprentice living in this magic tower, he clearly felt an energy that made his soul tremble uncontrollably. It was as if a gigantic meteor had fallen from the sky and smashed into a frail ant. If he didn't have enough confidence in the person he was loyal to, he might have wanted to escape from the danger zone. It wasn't until the energy disappeared that he mustered up the courage to go to the top of the tower to investigate. Looking at the young man standing not far away in shock and nervousness, Zhang Cheng waved his hand casually and restored the big hole on his head. Then, he replied, "No, it's nothing. It's just a visit from an old friend." But he obviously couldn't control himself well, so he accidentally caused some damage. But it doesn't matter. Even if this tower is completely destroyed, it will only take a few seconds for me to rebuild it. I see. I believe your friend must be as powerful as you. Islands hurriedly bowed and complimented. That's right. He's a powerful and cunning guy. He's a complete egoist, with the same kind of people. Zhang Cheng sighed with emotion. To be honest, he didn't hate the way the initiator behaved. The relationship between the two was not hostile. At most, they saw their own shadows in each other, so they instinctively chose to reject each other. But in comparison, the initiator had an innate self-discipline and restraint. No matter how much he hated Zhang Cheng, he would choose to cooperate for the greater benefit. Zhang Cheng, on the other hand, was the opposite. With the rapid expansion of his strength, he gradually got used to doing whatever he wanted. He didn't like to be restrained, and he didn't want to suppress the madness and the spark of inspiration in his subconscious. If an analogy had to be used, it was as if they were standing in front of a mirror and looking at the other side of themselves. Due to the recognition of their own uniqueness, no one liked to see the opposite of themselves in the mirror. Instead, they hoped to break the mirror and destroy their other self forever. Fortunately, this could only be considered as an instinct and impulse at most, and not a conclusion that was reached after careful consideration. Especially when the other side was almost as powerful as them, impulsive actions would often bring about disastrous consequences. Therefore, neither side chose to let instinct win over reason. You don't seem to like him? Islands acutely sensed something and looked up with a trace of curiosity in his eyes. Zhang Cheng smiled noncommittally. That's right. I hate him, just like I hate myself. Do you know? In fact, the thing that humans hate the most is not your enemies or competitors, but the flaws found after self-examination. To put it bluntly, it's ourselves. That's right, the thing that everyone fears and hates the most is actually the part that has been suppressed all this time. You mean we will instinctively reject people who are similar to us, but at the same time, completely opposite? Lawrence frowned subconsciously, obviously not quite understanding the meaning of these words. Maybe, maybe not. Everyone has their own ideas. What I think is suitable may not be suitable for you. All right, let's end this topic here. Tell me, did Kerwin drink the medicine? Zhang Cheng did not seem to want to talk about his complicated relationship with the initiators, so he took the initiative to change the topic. He knew that with the other party's visit, he could no longer complete the test bit by bit as planned. He had to speed up, even if it meant sacrificing the entire planet. I've already given him the medicine, but for some reason, he chose not to drink it. Master, I think his loyalty to you is completely superficial, but he's full of vigilance behind your back. Islands took the opportunity to make a malicious guess. Although he was not the kind of person who liked to maliciously slander or defame his competitors, ever since he saw his former mentor and Kerwin trying to squeeze him out, he had long been burning with rage. He hoped that one day he would be able to take revenge. Unfortunately, Zhang Cheng did not care about this at all. He teased with a half-smile. I know he's never been loyal, not even the slightest bit, but so what? Do you think he'd dare betray me? No, he wouldn't. He knows that a little betrayal would result in a fate 10,000 times worse than death. Since he doesn't dare betray you, what's the point of loyalty? Remember, never chase after loyalty. Loyalty is a relative definition. Its true meaning is to restrict a person's actions through benefits, morals, and other factors to ensure that they won't do anything that is detrimental to the person they are loyal to. Understood. I'll keep an eye on Kerwin for you. Allens lowered his head and hurriedly bowed. He then turned and disappeared around the corner of the stairs. At the same time, Kerwin was also in a city that had just been conquered. He held up a bottle of liquid that emitted a strange luster. His expression was grave as he cursed in a low voice. Damn it. This thing looks really evil. Do I really have to drink it? It was obvious that he was becoming more and more suspicious. He suspected that there was something in this bottle that was detrimental to him, or that it was a special additive that was secretly controlling his thoughts and will. There was no other way. Dictators and tyrants had to be vigilant at all times. Otherwise, they might die in the next second from a glass of poison wine or a dagger stabbing into their heart from behind. Just as he was hesitating and wanted to find someone to test it on, the window was suddenly shattered by a black shadow with a clang. After the black shadow landed, it immediately threw out two throwing items that instantly released a dazzling white light that was as bright as the sun. Oh, bastard. My eyes. I can't see. Guards. Assassins. A few bodyguards screamed for help as they quickly moved to the side of the person they were protecting. But before they could touch the Lord, Kerwin suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. Then, a cold and powerless feeling began to gradually spread throughout his body. His heart was pierced. Fear and despair quickly spread from his brain to his entire body. He didn't have time to think too much. He directly opened the bottle in his hand and drank the transparent liquid inside. Chapter 1069. Ha ha! Tyrant, go to hell, for the innocent people who died tragically at your hands. Feeling the reality of the dagger in his hand, the assassin knew that his incomparably dangerous assassination plan had succeeded. He laughed heartily and did not even have the slightest intention of escaping. He planned to gladly accept his death. To be precise, he knew that there was no way he could escape, so he was already prepared to give up his life. Perhaps in his opinion, to be able to exchange his life for the life of an ambitious tyrant was simply what a legendary hero would do. But in reality, he was just a pitiful worm who had been deceived by the heroic story, an idiot who was completely unaware that he was being used by the great nobles and the royal family. No, I won't die. I am a chosen one. I am destined to create great achievements and establish an incomparably huge empire. And you are just a clown who overestimates himself. Kerwin was clearly enraged. He endured the intense pain from his chest, and his entire body trembled involuntarily. He could feel that as the potion entered his stomach, an unprecedented surge of life force was rapidly flowing through his body along with his blood. Strength, limitless power. At the same time, there was unbearable pain and torture. Although his damaged heart was still spurting blood, he was not weak at all. Instead, he had endless strength. He grabbed tightly onto the assassin's arm, and with a little force, tore it off. Bang! Ah! The assassin screamed as he flew more than 10 meters away and crashed heavily into the hard wall. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood and fell into a pool of his own blood. In the terrifying collision, not only had he lost an arm, but he had also broken his spine. His legs were no longer listening to him, and his internal organs were also severely injured. Inhuman strength. All the bodyguards and soldiers who had regained their vision and rushed in from outside could not help but be dumbfounded. They even forgot to deal with the dying captive. Laugh. Why the F***CK? Aren't you laughing? Laugh for me. Kerwin obviously had no intention of letting the assassin go. He stepped forward, picked him up with one hand, and with the other tore the assassin's mouth from ear to ear, revealing a mouthful of blood-stained teeth. At this moment, he was so excited and tyrannical, tasting the wonderful feeling of personally torturing his enemy. Although the pain caused by the change in his body had not disappeared, he already understood how exciting it was to possess power. With power, there was no need to fear anyone. There was no need to worry about the possibility of an assassination. Moreover, they could enjoy the thrill of slaughter on the battlefield. My lord, please calm down. This assassin might know something. We'd better keep him alive. Trust me, my dearest, it will take at most half an hour for the interrogation team to get the information you need. One of the vassals cautiously reminded. It was not difficult to see from the frightened expression on his face that he was full of fear towards the sudden change in the lord he was loyal to. "Ah, sorry. I was a little excited and didn't control my strength well. Now take him away. Remember to inform me after the interrogation. I want to finish him myself." Kerwin casually threw the dying captive to the ground and allowed the guards to take him away. His movements were so relaxed that he did not forget to wipe the bloodstains on his chest and hands with a handkerchief, as if the one who was stabbed in the heart was not himself, but someone else. "Your wound." The vassal pointed at the completely healed wound, his mouth wide open and speechless. However, Kerwin did not mind and replied, "This is a gift from my great master. From now on, no one can easily kill me. Even if my head is chopped off, I can quickly recover as long as I put it back on. That's right, I now have the legendary immortal body." "Immortal body? My God. Then, does that mean you don't need us anymore?" The head of the bodyguards, Jieja, who was in charge of daily safety, asked. "No, of course not. I still need you all. Being immortal doesn't mean that I can't be defeated. I haven't reached the point where I think I can defeat all my enemies alone. All right, now immediately inform the servants to prepare a bath. I need to take a bath to wash away the strong smell of blood on my body. Also, regarding what happened today, no one is allowed to spread it, understand?" After saying these words of warning, Kerwin waved his hand impatiently, indicating that everyone should leave. Right now, he needed some privacy to test the level of his newly acquired power, especially the most important regeneration ability. "As you wish." The bodyguards and the guards who rushed in hurriedly left the room, not forgetting to stop the servants who wanted to wipe the bloodstains on the floor and walls. After everyone had left, Kerwin drew the curtains as fast as he could, locked the door, drew out his sword, and cautiously made a wound that was a few millimeters deep in his palm. Under normal circumstances, such a deep wound would definitely cause blood to flow nonstop. However, this time, not only did he not bleed, the wound healed automatically as soon as it appeared, so fast that the blood did not even have a chance to flow out. Shock, excitement, ecstasy. Kerwin could not find the right words to describe his current feelings. Never in his wildest dreams did he think that his mysterious master would be so generous. In order to figure out the limits of his body, in the next half an hour, he repeatedly self-harmed, as well as tested his strength and agility. The results were pleasantly surprising. Not only did he have a monstrous recovery ability, but his frontal combat ability was also far superior to the most powerful knight under him. As long as he wanted to, he could make his opponent's weapon drop with one blow. If it was a heavy weapon, such as a warhammer, an axe, or a chain hammer, he could also instantly smash most wooden and ironclad shields and smash the person holding the shield into a meat patty. Haha, this is the gift I want the most, excluding the power. Thank you, generous master. One day, I will return this gratitude to you with interest. In a low murmur, Kerwin quickly hid the insidious smile that flashed across his face and returned to his usual serious appearance. He left the room, full of blood, and walked towards the bathroom. Ambition was an addictive poison. The tyrants, without exception, had a strong desire to not be inferior to others. Now, the combination of these two things made him more and more arrogant, so much so that he was no longer willing to be a puppet. However, the interesting thing was that Kerwin did not understand what he was about to face. Otherwise, he would never have such ideas. Chapter 1070. The kingdom of Anoia was located in the southwest corner of the continent. It was a feudal state with a relatively warm climate. It was mainly ruled by the royal family and 6 powerful dukes. It was neither strong nor weak in the surrounding areas, especially its navy, which was a strong deterrent to the enemy's coastal towns. Generally speaking, no one dared to provoke such a powerful country. Otherwise, trade would be severely affected. But today, the king, Vindra V, who had not stayed up late to deal with government affairs for 30 years, gave up on his date with his beautiful lover and appeared in his study in the middle of the night. The marshal of the army, Duke Brunhilde, also appeared with him. Both of them listened to the spy's report seriously. Soon, Vindra V could not help but roar in anger. Useless! What a piece of trash! I gave him so many elite troops, even an army of spellcasters. But he actually lost, and he lost so badly. Almost half of our territory has been invaded. Your Majesty, please calm down. Now is not the time to hold them accountable. The rebels have taken over half of the kingdom's land and even uprooted the nobles you've infeft. If they really gain a foothold, we'll all be doomed, Duke Brunhilde reminded in a serious tone. Damn it. Of course I know that. But the problem is, can you guarantee that our troops won't be defeated by those monsters and steel golems that came out of nowhere? Vendor V asked sternly. As an old king who had been in power for more than 30 years, he had never heard of such a ridiculous situation in his life. The Northwest Province, which had always been known for its poverty, backwardness, and toughness, now had an army of 20,000 steel golems and monsters that could obey orders 100% of the time. Was all of this supported by a hostile country? Or was it a god hiding in the depths of the forest who had awoken from his slumber to start a war that would sweep the entire continent? No matter which it was, it would be a disaster for the kingdom of Anoia. Duke Brunhilde seemed to have noticed the king's anxiety and suggested, I believe that the best way to deal with this is to shrink the defensive line and build a defensive line around Stonehenge. At the same time, we should send out messengers to try to negotiate with the enemy and buy as much time as possible to gather intelligence and plan a counterattack. Also, I heard that Kerwin Oren used to be a suitor of Princess Vilya when he was young. Perhaps we can use this to our advantage. You mean to use my beloved daughter to seduce that despicable, dirty, and ugly country bumpkin? The king was obviously enraged, and his eyes were burning with anger. To be precise, any self-respecting ruler would not tolerate such a blatant humiliation. Unfortunately, politics was often out of one's control, especially when it involved the interests of the entire ruling class. Even the king could not stand on the opposite side of the ruling class. Otherwise, the dukes might join forces to launch a coup and replace the king with a new king who could represent their interests. In any case, as long as the bloodline of the royal family was not changed, it would not cause too much of a disturbance. Your Majesty, trust me, this is the only way to confuse the enemy and even find out what secrets he's hiding. As far as I know, Kerwin was assassinated not long ago. Even though we don't know the details, spies found that the servants who cleaned up the room brought out a large amount of blood-stained items. He should have been severely injured. However, in less than 2 days, he appeared in public unscathed. This is definitely not normal. Duke Brunhilde tried his best to dissuade the king. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to join forces with the other dukes to launch a coup. Are you sure that sacrificing my daughter will bring victory to the kingdom? A true victory? King Winger V looked up and stared into the duke's eyes. Brunhilde nodded without hesitation. Of course. I promise. Also, I hope to meet with the princess alone before I leave. I want to make sure she understands her mission. All right, I promise you. But if you don't give me the promised victory after Vilya's sacrifice, I will let you know how terrifying a king's anger can be. With a low growl, the king finally decided to compromise. He had no choice. Whether it was to protect the dignity of the kingdom or to unite all the nobles, he had to make the sacrifice. Moreover, the princess was a political bargaining chip. Whether it was to marry an important vassal or to another kingdom, it was not up to the king to decide. Of course, I swear on my life and the honor of my house. Duke Brunhilde placed a hand on his chest and solemnly promised. Soon, under the full operation of these two people in power, the envoy group, led by the young princess, left the capital with great fanfare. They slowly approached the front line where the two sides were facing each other. Before they reached their destination, Kerwin, who was in a faraway city, received the news. His eyes were filled with anticipation as he smiled and muttered to himself, "Haha, you're finally here? The princess that I yearned for day and night. I'm afraid you'll never know that the country noble you once ignored is now a threat to the royal family's rule. Don't worry, I'll soon devour you along with it. From now on, everything that I have desired but could not obtain before will be taken back one by one." The moment he finished speaking, He looked up at Baron Kellenst, who was listening to his orders. "My dear friend, I have something to trouble you with." "What is it?" The Baron looked up with a bloodthirsty expression. "Bring the princess here for me. Remember, I only want to see the princess. Clean up the rest while you're at it. After all, I'm not stupid enough to fall for such childish tricks," Kerwin ordered with a cold smile. Clearly, he only wanted the princess and not some bullsh**T group of envoys. He had no intention of negotiating from the start. The only reason he didn't continue the attack was to wipe out all the resistance in his territory, not to think that taking over half of the kingdom's territory would be enough. "As you wish. I promise that apart from the princess, none of the ambassadors will be able to reach you alive." Baron Kellenst then bowed deeply and left the room. About half an hour later, he brought a squad of elite knights and charged out of the city gates, intending to massacre the entire envoy. Chapter 1071. It went without saying that the ambassadors from the kingdom didn't expect Kerwin to be someone who didn't like to play by the rules, nor did they expect him to be willing to bear the infamy of being a slaughterer. In the end, when the ferocious cavalry charged over, the ambassadors weren't able to put up a single defense and were taken down in a single wave. In less than a few seconds, more than half of the unlucky ones were impaled by lances and nailed to the ground. The rest didn't fare any better. They were either trampled into meat paste by strong war horses or decapitated by sharp long swords and scimitars. Fresh blood, dismembered corpses, screams. Baron Kellenst used his actions to prove his passion for slaughter. After personally executing the last of the injured, he opened the door of the carriage and dragged the trembling maidservant out. He tossed her to the ground and crushed her chest with his foot. Then he took off his visor and said to the pale-faced Villia, "Your Highness, please come with me. The Lord wishes to see you immediately." "You? Why did you kill them?" the princess asked loudly, suppressing the fear in her heart. It wasn't hard to tell from her trembling voice that the hellish scene before her had shattered everything she'd known for more than a decade. It was the first time she'd felt the cruelty of the outside world. She didn't think human lives could be so cheap. They were killed without even a word, and their corpses were tossed to the side of the muddy road to be eaten by wild beasts. It wasn't as exciting as the stories described it. There wasn't even the courteous duels between knights. There was only slaughter, the absolute suppression of the strong against the weak. No matter how noble one's birth was, everyone was equal before cold weapons. Once one's vitals were pierced, one would die in the blink of an eye. There was no way one could fight back after being heavily injured. Them? Baron Kellenst glanced at the corpses nearby and said with disdain, "Trash has no value on the battlefield. I kill them for their own good. Otherwise, they'd have a mental breakdown against those monsters and metal golems. They'd be unable to extricate themselves from the shadows for the rest of their lives. Rather than living such a lowly life, they'd rather die gloriously in battle. But you even killed my maidservant. She was just a young girl. He was not a warrior. I'm not an envoy either," the princess argued angrily. One had to know that a personal maid was usually a niece of a noble with a certain status and position. She might even be a relative. The two of them would get to know each other when they were very young and would accompany each other for the rest of their lives. Their relationship would be very close, so close that there would be some ambiguity that went beyond friendship. "I'm sorry. My lord ordered me to only bring you back. Therefore, they were worthless. All of you must die," said Baron Kellenst as he kicked the corpses. The maidservant's eyes were wide open. Even before she died, she was unwilling to believe that there was actually a man who could ignore her beauty and impressive figure and directly choose to kill her instead of doing something like violating her. Sensing the tyrannical aura emanating from him, Princess Villia closed her eyes in despair. She couldn't bear to watch the gruesome scene, so she allowed herself to be pulled onto the back of a war horse and galloped towards their destination with the cavalrymen. Baron Kellenst, who never knew how to be gentle with women, completely ignored the torture of riding a horse for a self-proclaimed virtuous princess, especially when she was wearing a beautiful white dress that symbolized purity. By the time they returned to the city, Villia's dress was almost like a beggar's. Her legs felt like they didn't belong to her, and she couldn't help but tremble slightly when she walked. Fortunately, her etiquette teacher's strict training prevented her from losing her composure at such a crucial moment. She forced herself to put on an arrogant expression as she walked into the study. Kerwin, who had been waiting for a long time, quickly stood up and pinched her right hand, kissing the back of it affectionately. "Ah, Your Highness, you're finally here. Did you know? I've waited for this moment for 5 whole years. The scene of that parting is like a painting forever engraved in my heart. So you're using this method to take revenge for my rejection back then." It took a lot of effort for Princess Vilya to stop herself from pulling her hand back. Her beautiful face was covered in frost. "Revenge? No, I think you've misunderstood something. Why do you think His Majesty sent you to me? And as an emissary at that, he wants to use my infatuation with you to stall for time and obtain information. I'm not so stupid as to let him succeed. That's why killing the entire group and leaving only you alive is the ideal situation," Kerwin explained with a faint smile. Just like the saying goes, men are essentially the same as peacocks. When their hormones were released in large quantities, they liked to show off their excellent side in front of the opposite sex or gender they liked, hoping to obtain the right to mate. It was obvious that Kerwin's current thoughts were to get this noble princess into his bed. It would be best if she could bear him a child. Then he would have enough excuse and reason to swallow the entire kingdom. In order to achieve this goal, he didn't even bother to hide the lust in his eyes. His gaze seemed to be able to strip her white dress bare. Just as Vilya was trembling with anger and was about to raise her arm to slap him, a strong energy wave suddenly came from the room. The next second, a teleportation door suddenly appeared out of thin air, and islands crossed a long distance and arrived at the center of the room. However, he had already implanted the power of chaos, so he didn't care about the young and beautiful princess. Instead, he asked without hesitation, "I heard that you drank that potion. How are you feeling? Do you feel any discomfort? Damn it, why do you always come and go without knocking?" Kerwin grumbled through gritted teeth. After all, he had almost broken the princess' psychological barrier and taken advantage of her weakness. If he used a little more violence, he would have been able to take her down. However, the sudden appearance of this young man had disrupted everything. "Knock. No, there's no need for that. I represent my master. You should know that there's no need for privacy in front of him, including me." Islands subconsciously glanced at the princess, who had somehow regained her rationality. His tone wasn't polite at all. In fact, he already saw Kerwin as an enemy who would betray him sooner or later. How could he be nice to him? It was already very considerate of him not to secretly plot against him. Chapter 1072. What are you trying to do? Kerwin, who had always been sensitive to hostility, sensed the attitude of the other party and frowned subconsciously. He really couldn't figure out how he had offended the young man in front of him, and he didn't know that his secret plot from not long ago had already been exposed in public. "No, I don't want to do anything. I'm just following the orders of my master. Come, give me some of your blood, and then I'll confirm which energy is working in your body. Don't worry, no matter what, you're still my master's dog. As a servant, I won't overstep my boundaries." Islands handed over a small knife and an empty bottle without any hesitation, completely ignoring the fact that there were outsiders present. Kerwin was clearly enraged. His 2 hands clenched tightly into fists, as if he would rush over and choke the young man to death in the next second. But his rationality stopped the strong impulse in his subconscious. He clenched his teeth and made a small cut in his palm, allowing the dark red blood to flow into the glass bottle. After doing all this, he returned the bottle and the knife, and roared with a cold face, "Scram! Get out of my sight. Maybe I'm a dog, but you're not much better than me. At least for now, my position is irreplaceable, and you're just a servant who runs errands. One day, you'll regret your rudeness and offense. I swear." "Ah, useless barking. Do you know? Master once told me that only the weak would use words to vent the dissatisfaction and resentment in their hearts. The truly strong would always put their dissatisfaction and resentment into action. Stop your laughable threats. Don't think that I don't know what you've been doing behind my back." Alan slightly raised the corner of his mouth, his tone full of sarcasm. There was no doubt that he enjoyed angering his competitor. He enjoyed watching the other party lose his cool, especially when there was a beautiful princess beside him. The most vicious humiliation in the world was to completely expose the unknown side of the target in front of the person he loved the most. Everyone had their own dark side in their hearts. Everyone's subconscious hid negative emotions called selfishness, jealousy, and greed. Perhaps people with strong self-control could keep these emotions hidden until late at night, when no one was looking, and then find a chance to silently vent them. But more people, once provoked by the outside world, could not help but fly into a rage out of humiliation and even do some unimaginable rash actions. Very good. I'll remember what you said today. Kerwin's cruel side completely exploded. He kicked the table over and turned to leave the room without looking back. He even threw the princess he desired to get to the side. As a tyrant, what he cared about the most was his own feelings. As for women, they were just tools for him to vent his desires. The only difference was that some of the tools were more valuable. They belonged to the category of priceless jewels. They would always be worth collecting and keeping. Others were cheap dolls that would be abandoned once they lost their novelty. Watching Kelvin's irritable figure disappear at the end of the corridor, Ellen's immediately laughed and teased. Do you think you can become a great emperor? You're just a dog by your master's side. No matter what you achieve in the future, this will never change. Just wait and see. I'll let you slowly accept it. Just as he finished speaking, Princess Velia, who had been listening for a long time, finally could not take it anymore. She took the initiative to step forward and asked, "Sorry to disturb you, but who was the master you mentioned just now? Could it be that everything Kerwin did was ordered by someone?" Ignorant woman, you don't deserve to know this. Instead of spending so much effort to gather information, why don't you worry about yourself? As far as I know, in the past half a month, at least 6 young women have been tortured to death by Kerwin. Their bodies are buried in the backyard of the castle. Of course, because of your status, I don't think he'll treat you the same as those commoners, but I don't think he'll treat you any better. As he said this, Islands' eyes flashed with unbridled mockery. As the power of chaos began to grow in his body, he had long since abandoned the instinctive desire to mate and turned it all into a fanatical pursuit of knowledge and power. To a certain extent, he even despised such low-level behavior that countless people never got tired of, especially when he thought of the high and mighty princess being violated by the person he hated the most. He felt an inexplicable pleasure in his mind. The reason was simple. He was born a merchant and had been bullied and humiliated by nobles of the same age since he was young. Even when he learned magic, he was inferior to others. Naturally, the seeds of hatred were planted. When she thought of Kerwin pressing her down on the bed and ravaging her, Princess Velia could not help but shudder. No, I'd rather die than let that happen. Save me. I know you have the ability. Ha. Sorry, give me a reason. Why should I save you? Is it because you're born noble? Or is it because you have a face and figure that are prettier than most women? Don't think too highly of yourself, my noble princess. Prepare to enjoy your stormy first night. Accompanied by a slightly cynical laugh, Islands once again cast a teleportation spell and disappeared into thin air, leaving only Princess Velia in the room, who did not know what to do. Despair like never before. She, who had lived like a princess since she was young, had never thought that one day she would fall into such a state. No, I can't give in to fate. There must be a way. Princess Velia, who was trying her best to stay awake, slapped her cheeks hard, trying to calm herself down. At the same time, she looked around, trying to find a way to escape. But it was a pity that this room was used as a temporary place to deal with official business and rest, because after careful inspection, it was confirmed that there were no hidden tunnels or windows. The only exit was the gate, which was guarded by at least 2 knights, a team of elite soldiers, and 4 iron puppets. With such a lineup, even an experienced adventure team would be killed without a doubt, let alone a weak princess. Just as Velia began to panic and rummage through her things, trying to find a weapon to defend herself or kill herself, the tightly shut door suddenly opened, and an elderly man walked in. She had no time to hide it. She could only grab a small knife that was used for cutting meat or shaving. She shouted, "Go away! Don't come near me! Don't come near me!" Chapter 1073. "Ha! Don't be so nervous, my dear princess. I'm not Kerwin." The old man smiled and raised his hands to show that he was not hostile. He was none other than Isolde, who had just returned from the outside world. There was no doubt that he had felt the energy fluctuations of the portal, so he wanted to come and see what was going on. He did not expect to run into such a ridiculous situation. "Your master, Isolde?" Princess Vilya obviously recognized him. Her eyes were filled with surprise and excitement, but it quickly turned into suspicion. Sensing the intense emotional fluctuations of the girl, Isolde sat down casually and replied with a slightly hoarse voice, "Yes, it's me. Long time no see, my dear princess. Time flies. I vaguely remember the last time I saw you. You were just a little girl in her early teens. You were so naughty that His Majesty had a headache. But now, she's already a slender and elegant young lady. Why are you here? Could it be?" "Yes, I joined Kerwin and was one of his most important partners." Before the princess could finish her words, Isolde gave a straightforward answer. "Why? Why did you betray the kingdom?" Vilya asked angrily. She could not believe that this old man, who had never been interested in war and politics, had become the enemy of her father and the entire kingdom. "Why do you ask so many questions? Remember, in the world of adults, there are many times when there is no choice. Although things have developed to this point, which is not what I wanted to see, since I have made a choice, I will stick to it until the end. Unfortunately, my princess, your family is about to lose hundreds of years of glory and decline, even to the point of extinction. No one can change this. Your father can't, and neither can those dukes who are used to being high and mighty." Isolde spoke his heartfelt words. "Impossible. Dream on. The rebels will not succeed. The nobles and the people are on the side of the royal family. You are the public enemy of the entire kingdom. My father and the dukes will work together to defeat your ambitions." Vilya quickly retorted. Although this rebuttal was so feeble, she still had a trace of naivety. She hoped that, like the story described, one or several heroes would stand up and turn the tide. Unfortunately, the reason why the story was beautiful and touching was because it was unreal. Reality was often cruel. Almost all the victors in history had used a lot of dirty tricks to secretly trip up their opponents, even at the expense of the interests and lives of the people at the bottom of society. Isolde didn't take the girl's rebuttal seriously. Instead, he shook his head nonchalantly. "Forget it. If this makes you feel better, please continue to be optimistic. But the result will definitely be the opposite of what you expect." It was quite clear that the more he behaved like this, the more Princess Vilya had a bad feeling about this. She hesitated for a moment before carefully probing. "Was the master that Kerwin mentioned?" "Master? Who told you that?" Isolde's pupils constricted, and his powerful magic began to spread in all directions, putting a lot of pressure on the girl. He mentioned it when he was talking to a young man." Princess Vilya began to feel a little breathless, and she stuttered out everything she knew. "Islands? So he was here." Isolde frowned subconsciously. He was thinking about whether his former apprentice's sudden appearance at this time was a personal act, or if he had been instructed to do so by his master. Who is the master? Is he the one who is spying on the kingdom's land? Princess Vilya asked again as she felt the great pressure gradually disappear. Spying on the kingdom's land? Ha ha! You've succeeded in making me laugh. No, my naive princess. The power that our master possesses is far beyond your imagination. If he really wants land, he can even destroy all the kingdoms in a few months and unify the entire continent. In fact, he's just doing some interesting experiments. As for annexing the kingdom, it's Kerwin's own ambition and desire. Isolde laughed as he made a vivid analogy. After all, he had seen with his own eyes how Zhang Cheng created monsters with spell-like abilities out of thin air. He had also seen the steel puppet assembly workshop under the Mage Tower. In the face of such invincible power, not to mention mere mortals, even gods would have to obediently kneel down and submit. Of course, the premise was that the gods worshipped by the various religions actually existed. Hearing this, Princess Vilya immediately begged, "Please, I beg you, take me to him. I want to see him." "See the master? You?" Isolde raised his eyebrows, and a look of suspicion appeared on his face. If it were any other request, he might have agreed on account of their past friendship. However, he did not feel that he had the right to bring a stranger to see Zhang Cheng. "Why can't I?" Princess Vilya blinked innocently. On one hand, she wanted to complete the mission given to her by her father and the Duke. On the other hand, she wanted to leave this place as soon as possible and escape from Kerwin's control. Otherwise, she would have nightmares whenever she closed her eyes. Isolde noticed her little trick and pondered for a moment while stroking his beard. Soon, he stood up and said, "All right, I can help you this once, but only this once. I must remind you that you'd better not be so self-righteous in front of our master. Don't think that you can rely on your status and beauty. In fact, in our master's eyes, you and I are no different from ants on the ground that he can step on at any time." "Understood. I swear," Princess Vilya hurriedly promised. However, she was the only one who knew what she was thinking in her heart. After all, habits and temperaments accumulated over the years were not something that could be easily changed. It was just like the declining aristocrats in Europe at the end of the 19th century on Earth. They had already started to fall from a high place like a roller coaster, but they still put on a so-called aristocratic superiority all day long, thinking that they were nobler than those businessmen and capitalists who were full of the smell of money. This was especially so for their bloodline, which was regarded as their life. They would not allow it to be tainted in the slightest, even if a large number of intimate interactions led to the occurrence of various terrifying diseases. "I hope so. Come with me." Isolde glanced at her meaningfully and stood up to cast a teleportation spell, opening a portal to the Mage Tower. As one of the earliest people to join the Mage Tower, he had the right to directly enter the portal. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1074. How is it? How do you feel after visiting my home planet? Zhang Cheng asked curiously as he sat in a room on the top floor of the tower. He sized up Gru, who had just crossed the distance. He could sense that this chaos overlord was in a very strange state. He seemed to be in deep thought, but also seemed to have comprehended something. It was obvious that this trip to Earth was rather valuable in his eyes. Gru waved his insect-like upper limbs and hesitated for a moment. He then replied in an uncertain tone, "It's hard to describe with words. You and the planet you were born on are a highly complicated and contradictory place. This is completely different from my home planet. This is because, from our understanding, a collective is a society where absolute hierarchy and order must be established from top to bottom. Every tiny individual must obey the will of the highest ruler, and the highest ruler has the duty to ensure the continuation and development of the community." "Oh, so you and your race are a species with a high degree of dominance and obedience?" Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. "That's right." Gru imitated humans and nodded his oval-shaped head lightly. "I believe you must find it strange that a community like me, who lives in a highly orderly and unified community, would be more inclined towards chaos, right? It's a little strange, but that's not what I'm most curious about. On the contrary, what I'm most curious about is how you broke free from the influence of your environment and traditional views and walked a path that belongs to you alone." Zhang Cheng's interest gradually surfaced on his face. There was no way he wasn't interested. It was like in the world of ants or bees, where a worker bee or ant was suddenly unwilling to repeat the arduous work day and night. Instead, it chose to risk its life and leave the community to pursue its own path of evolution. In fact, due to genetic inheritance, whether it was a worker bee or ant, it was impossible for them to disobey the queen's orders. This also meant that this ugly and comical overlord was actually a mutant. Gru undoubtedly sensed Zhang Cheng's thoughts at this moment. He quickly took the initiative to explain, "In the beginning, I was like most of the people in the tribe. I lived like a soulless person. I only knew how to complete the missions given to me by the higher-ups. I didn't know how to think, and I didn't know what freedom and resistance were. But one day, my brain seemed to gradually become smarter. I began to notice that I was different from others. I began to learn to think about what was fairness, what was benefits, and what was power. Why are some fellows so high and mighty from the moment they are born, treating us as slaves and servants? So, you've awakened? Zhang Cheng's lips curled into a playful smile. Awakening? No, I don't think that's the right word. Instead, I think it's rebirth. Yes, from that day on, I buried my past self and lived with a new identity. In order to prevent others of my kind from noticing that I was different from the others, I carefully hid myself and secretly observed the operations of the entire race. In the end, I discovered that it was actually very weak. It was so weak that just by destroying the queen in charge of reproduction, the entire race would fall into eternal damnation. When he said this, Gru's tone was extremely strange. It was as if he was mocking something, but also as if he was mocking himself. Sensing the strange aura in the air, Zhang Chen couldn't help but sigh. Sigh, you don't have to continue. I think I know what kind of choice you made. Personally burying the race that gave birth and nurtured you is the only way to cut off the past and enter the future. Just like how I gave up my humanity and part of myself, you also paid a huge price for it. From that moment on, I swore to destroy order and scatter the tinder of chaos in every corner of the universe. How about it? Do you want to form an alliance with me? From a certain perspective, we have a lot in common in terms of thoughts and ideals. We're the most ideal, natural allies. Gru extended an invitation, but unfortunately, Zhang Cheng rejected without hesitation. Sorry, let's forget about forming an alliance. Perhaps you won't believe me, but those who form an alliance with me usually don't end up well. At least until now, all of my allies either disappeared completely or turned against me. Moreover, don't you think that forming an alliance is the action of the weak? Only when one is weak will they need the help of an ally. Speaking of allies, he felt rather emotional. After all, from the beginning until now, he had formed an alliance with at least a few dozen people. But what was interesting was that none of them had lasted to the end. They either turned against each other halfway, due to a conflict of interest, or each had their own ulterior motives and plotted against each other from the start. They couldn't wait to kill each other. Therefore, in essence, allies were things that the weaker party forcefully pulled together to increase their chances of victory. They weren't decisive at all. Weak? Ha ha! I have to admit that as a newcomer who hasn't fully grasped the true power of a ruler, your arrogance is truly eye-opening. I'm very curious now. If you fully grasp the power that belongs to you in the future, will you declare war on other rulers? You have to know that the universe has been silent for far too long. Perhaps it's time to kick off a new round of war. Gru laughed loudly as he spread his insect-like limbs and laughed without restraint. Just as he said, if the balance continued for too long, it would make these rulers who had endless lifespans feel bored and lonely. But now that weak balance had finally been broken. Order and chaos had each obtained an extra slot to replenish themselves, and there were already undercurrents surging behind the scenes. There might be a three-way war that would decide the direction of the universe at any time. This was especially so for the neutral faction that worked hard to maintain the balance. They would definitely be the first to be suppressed. Don't be hasty. With my current power, it's still too early to talk about this. Let's finish this game first. What do you think? With that, Zhang Cheng raised his hand and snapped his fingers lightly, activating the huge magic mirror hanging on the wall. Instantly, a horrifying and strange scene of the island kingdom appeared out of thin air. Unlike the previous time, almost all the inhabitants of the island were parasitized by metal bugs. They looked lifeless on the surface, but they were busy preparing for the war that was about to erupt. There was no conversation. There was no entertainment. There was only an extremely regular schedule and work. Admiring the mechanical actions of the people in the mirror, Gru couldn't help but praise with a smile. My children are doing well. We can enter the expansion phase soon. Chapter 1075. That's right. Your children are indeed capable. At this rate, the entire Western continent will be under your control in a few years. However, I never thought that you, a Chaos faction member, would actually create such a life form that contains absolute order. Can you tell me what you were thinking back then? Zhang Cheng turned around and asked a question that had been bothering him for a long time. The monsters he created, although on the surface, seemed to obey the commands of the commander. They were still filled with madness and chaos in nature. In other words, the commander could give basic orders such as attack, retreat, and defense, but he could not give any more detailed orders. Because the nature of the monsters was chaos, once they entered battle mode, they would not listen to any orders and would do whatever they wanted. The intrinsic nature of chaos was vividly displayed at this moment. Moreover, although Zhang Cheng liked to make plans, he would still disrupt them from time to time. Deep down, he was an extremely crazy and egotistical person. Once he went crazy, even he would be afraid of himself. Everything showed that chaos was a power that could change the nature of a life form from the inside out. A life form that gained its approval would definitely not lean towards order. So you've noticed. I thought you'd take a long time to ask this question. Gru teased casually. Actually, you've only seen the surface of these little things. You haven't truly sensed their intrinsic nature, that terrifying nature that is filled with slaughter and destruction. Please continue. I'm listening. Zhang Cheng held his chin with one hand, his eyes shining with incomparable curiosity. No matter what, Gru was a veteran overlord. In terms of the use and control of the laws, Gru was at least several levels above him. If he had the chance, he would definitely learn. Even if it was not suitable for him, there was no harm in using it as a reference. It's very simple. The order you're seeing now is only a kind of preliminary stage. Once my children have expanded the number of parasites to a certain extent and their technology has reached the space age, they will begin to expand crazily and irrationally. Through slaughter and extermination, they will cleanse and devour every civilization they encounter. This lawless behavior will continue until the first advanced civilization is born. In other words, they have entered a countdown to self-destruction from the very beginning. That's why the order you think of doesn't exist at all. Chaos is their true nature, Gru explained calmly. There is no doubt that the life form he created had borrowed a lot from the race he was born in. At the same time, he had also added some personal emotions into it. After all, even though the sovereign had discarded much of his past, there were still some things that were left behind in his memories. In fact, they were even more unforgettable than when he had first experienced them. Unless part of his memories were erased and his body became incomplete, even the most painful part would remain forever. Zhang Cheng could understand the other party, and he also understood that even he had not been able to break away from the habits of the human race. For example, the aesthetic style, and the familiarity he felt when he saw life forms that resembled humans. Thinking of this, he suddenly changed the topic and asked with a smile, "What do you think is civilization?" Civilization? Gru was clearly not used to such a quick and sudden change of topic. He was stunned for a moment. That's right. Civilization. Zhang Cheng gave an affirmative answer without hesitation. There are many definitions of civilization. Some are from the perspective of technology, while others are from the perspective of culture and social structure. I don't understand which one you're referring to, Gru asked with interest. There was no need to ask to know that he was starting to be interested in this topic. Zhang Cheng hesitated for a moment before replying with a smile. From the perspective of technology, it's too short and crude. It's not suitable for us to discuss it. Let's talk about it from the perspective of culture and social structure. Gru nodded thoughtfully. A very good starting point. The way I see it, whether a race enters the stage of civilization or not depends on whether they have formed a stable division of labor and structure of authority. This is the sign of civilization, and also the lowest threshold of civilization. If they can't even achieve this, then an intelligent race isn't worthy of being called a civilization. A very clear explanation, and I can't find a reason to refute it, Zhang Cheng praised with a smile. It had to be said that as the sovereign who stood at the end of the evolution of all life forms in the universe, he had seen the rise and fall of too many civilizations. He hit the nail on the head with a single sentence. To put it bluntly, civilization was the process of intelligent creatures from primitive tribes gradually gathering together to build cities. During this process, the way to obtain food through fishing and hunting would change to farming or nomadic herding. In the end, it would lead to the division of labor and a leap in productivity. What about you? What do you think civilization is? After explaining his point of view, Gru looked at Zhang Cheng. The latter was silent for a moment before he said with a slightly emotional tone, I think civilization is a kind of memory. It's rooted in a race's remembrance and reminiscence of the past. It's also an indispensable inheritance. Do you see the natives on this planet? They're actually very similar to a certain era on my home planet. Even though they're very primitive, very backward, and even ignorant to us, it's undeniable that they've created their own civilization. But now, because of our arrival, their civilization is going through an unprecedented upheaval. No one knows if this interesting civilization will decline after this war, or if it'll take the opportunity to rise and walk another path. Are you being sentimental? No, I'm just trying to use a different identity to appreciate and feel it. After all, I'm different from you. I've seen the rise and fall of too many races and civilizations. To me, all of this is still full of novelty. I can't help but want to do some interesting experiments. Experiments? Can I know the specifics? As soon as he heard the word experiment, Gru immediately became excited. The two tentacles on his head, but they were actually some kind of signal receiver, flickered with a faint light. What do you think? If I provide them with some technology that's beyond their understanding, what will happen? Zhang Cheng grinned mischievously. It was important to know that things like technology could be improved step by step according to the normal order. However, if one suddenly obtained technology that was far beyond the current level of technology, there were usually only two situations. One was to cause a huge social upheaval that would eventually lead to the death of a large number of people. The other was to launch a crazy war that would destroy the entire world. Chapter 1076. Exporting a dangerous technology to a backward civilization and then observing their reaction? I have to admit that your idea is very interesting. It even aroused my desire to observe and research. Gru didn't hide his interest in this aspect at all. His tone was filled with the urge to try it out. Restraint was never the essence of a civilization. On the contrary, the essence of a civilization was madness, and scrupulous, and filled with contradictions and intense conflicts. In the constant competition and destruction, a portion of the civilization would destroy or swallow another portion of the civilization. In the end, a relatively integrated environment would be formed on the planet and enter the interstellar era. This process was so cruel that there was less than a 1 in 10,000 chance of success. The rest would either be firmly bound to the mother planet by gravity or due to the invention of some powerful destructive weapons, resulting in the destruction of several relatively independent civilizations in the conflict. As someone who had experienced the shadow of nuclear annihilation during the Cold War on Earth, Zhang Cheng clearly knew what foolish mortals would do when they obtained powerful weapons. He shook his head with a smile. No, I don't plan to simply observe. I want to nurture a planet completely engulfed by chaos, a world filled with disorder, slaughter, and madness. I believe you should be able to sense the seed of chaos that I've planted on this planet. Think about it. When it starts to sprout, how magnificent will it be? Nurture a planet of chaos? Gru waved his hand in front of him in surprise to express the excitement in his heart. That's right. I know this sounds very whimsical, because the universe is currently maintained by the three basic laws of order, chaos, and neutrality. No matter which celestial body it is, it will at most have a certain inclination. It won't lean towards a certain faction, and it won't exclude the other two laws. However, I think that nothing can be perfect. There will always be some unknown loopholes that can be exploited. Zhang Cheng purposely paused at this point and turned his gaze to the huge mural hanging on the wall. The scenery in the mural was none other than the magnificent scene when he personally injected the power of chaos into the earth not long ago. In particular, the aura of destruction that assaulted one's face was simply immersive. Gru had no doubt seen the mural as well. He subconsciously asked, "Did you discover something?" Zhangqing nodded without any hesitation. "Yes, that's right. For the time being, I am not quite sure whether it was an accident or a coincidence, or some sudden enlightenment. It's so wonderful that I can't even describe it with words. Since that's the case, I'll have high expectations. But regarding the dangerous technology, have you chosen target yet?" Gru clearly didn't intend to delve too deeply into this matter. This was related to every ruler's understanding of their own strength, and it was a secret that couldn't be more private. If he was too curious, it would cause the relationship between the two of them to deteriorate rapidly, and they might even fall out over it. "I've chosen. Look, my servant has brought the most suitable target." Just as he finished speaking, suddenly, there was a light knock on the door of the room on the top floor of the tower, followed by Isolt's old voice. "Master, please forgive me for coming to disturb you at this time, but I've brought someone you might be interested in. Come in." Zhang Cheng crooked his finger, and the closed door opened automatically. In order not to cause the two natives to panic, Gru quickly isolated himself in the crack of the three-dimensional universe and silently observed the following development. "Master, this is the sixth princess of the kingdom, Vilya. She wants to see you no matter what." Isolt crouched down and bowed deeply, appearing unusually humble. In contrast, the princess who followed behind him was very bold. She stared at Zhang Cheng, who was sitting on the throne, and didn't even forget to look at the displays, decorations, and furnishings around her from the corner of her eyes. There is no doubt that from the moment she entered the tower, her heart had never stopped trembling. Whether it was the countless huge jewels embedded in the bottom floor, or the large amounts of gold and silver items that could be seen everywhere, or the magical puppets that looked extremely destructive, all of them proved the wealth and power of the master of the tower. The Royal Wizard Tower in the capital, which was hailed as an architectural miracle, was like a shabby beggar's nest compared to this. Of course, as she had received a good education, Vilya didn't show these complicated feelings on her face. She politely bowed like a lady and greeted with a pleasant voice, "Greetings, great master of the tower. I'm the princess of the kingdom, and also an envoy sent by the king." "Envoy?" Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows slightly, a playful expression on his face. In his impression, not just anyone could be an envoy. Not only did they have to have an outstanding mind and wit, but they also had to be tactful enough in politics. Obviously, a young lady of about 20 years old did not have enough experience. "Yes, I hope to speak with you alone. What do you think?" Vilya spoke the diplomatic words that she had been preparing for a long time in one breath. After all, Zhang Cheng's appearance of being in his early 20s was very deceiving, and many people would overlook his real age. "Hee, you want to negotiate with me? Interesting. Isolt, didn't you tell this princess who I am?" Zhang Cheng held his chin, a trace of mockery flashing in his eyes. Isolt hurriedly stepped forward and explained, "No, master, didn't mention anything about your privacy to her. Besides, this princess has lived in a relatively isolated state since she was young, and is surrounded by flattery and praise, so it's inevitable that she has some unrealistic ideas." "I understand now. An idiot who thinks the world revolves around her. If that's the case, then let's take her to the underground maze to see what kind of person she is talking to. I don't want to talk to an idiot who thinks she's infallible. At the very least, I have to let her know where she stands." After saying that, Zhang Cheng deliberately put on an impatient look and waved his hand. "Idiot and idiot? Is this how you describe a princess and a lady? That's too weak." Vilya's face turned red with anger. It was obviously the first time she had heard someone describe her like this. "As you wish, great master." Isolt ignored the princess's resistance and dragged her out of the room. When the door slammed shut, Vilya could not help but growl. "Let go of me. Why does he have to insult me?" "Shut up, if you don't want to die," Isolt scolded coldly. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1077. Shut up. Vilya's mouth was wide open in disbelief. She would never have imagined that Master Isolt, who was known for his gentleness and gentleness, would reprimand her in such a harsh tone. His eyes were murderous. That's right. Shut your mouth. Follow me with only your eyes. Take a good look at Master's greatness. Then he would decide how to talk to him. Otherwise, I'll kill you and leave your body in the outskirts for the wild beasts to eat. Isolde did not waste any time and walked straight to the tunnel at the bottom of the tower. About 10 minutes later, the two arrived at a huge underground maze that had been completely hollowed out. At first glance, there were tens of thousands of small paths that extended in all directions, densely packed like a spiderweb. In the deepest part of these paths was a giant city that was 100 times larger than any city on the surface. The residents of the city were not humans, but a group of monsters, a group of beasts, a group of creepy killing machines. Although Vilya did not count them, she knew that there were at least 1 million of them. If all of them were sent to the surface, it would be enough to conquer any so-called military power on the continent, or even start a massacre and raze their proud city to the ground. Cold, fear, trembling. After a full 10 minutes, she finally could not help but mutter to herself, How? How is this possible? I must be having a nightmare. Nightmare? This is a miracle of magic. No, it's a miracle. I can guarantee that only Master has such powerful magic in this world. His power is even greater than that of the gods. Now you should understand how ridiculous you were when you tried to negotiate, right? Master is invincible. He can do whatever he wants. No one can stop him. Isolde shouted with a fanatical expression. Although this was not the first time he had seen this magnificent underground maze, there was still an indescribable excitement in his heart. It was as if he had seen the end of the path to the sacred temple of magic. Even if he could never reach it, it was good to see it with his own eyes. What does he want to do? Conquer the world? Vilya's voice trembled slightly. She could not help but tremble. In the face of unparalleled power, the human will was not as strong as they imagined. Otherwise, heroes would not have become the monopoly of so few people. Generally speaking, in times of crisis, it was normal to turn around and run away or wait for death where they were. Master doesn't want to do anything, and he's not interested in conquering the world. He's only doing some experiments to prove some of his theories and conjectures. So I suggest you know your place. Otherwise, I can't guarantee that you'll leave this place alive. Isolde said as he turned and walked back. He did not want to be surrounded by millions of ferocious monsters, even if he knew that these monsters would not take the initiative to attack without receiving orders. Recognize myself? What do you think I should do to achieve my goal? Vilya repeated in a low voice. What do you think I should do to achieve my goal? How can we stop Kerwin from realizing his filthy ambitions? It's simple. She launched a coup and became the queen, then replaced Kerwin and became the Master's agent. This way, whatever he can obtain, you can also obtain. However, the price is that the kingdom will become the Master's testing ground, constantly waging wars to test the performance of these monsters in battle. Don't be in a hurry to make a choice. You still have time to think about it. Isolde gave a meaningful answer. As Kerwin's tyrant attribute grew stronger, he undoubtedly felt threatened. He planned to try and pull up a puppet that was easier to manipulate and manipulate. Obviously, Vilya was such a perfect candidate. First of all, the princess was young and had no experience in politics. Once she made up her mind, she would definitely launch a coup and oust her father and the other dukes. Naturally, Isolde was the only person she could rely on and negotiate with. Secondly, when two opposing camps were in a state of competition, the smart Kerwin would subconsciously restrain his tyranny and cruelty. He would try his best to please the Master and his colleagues who were in the same position as him. He would not put on that disgusting look of superiority, and he would not dare to take risks and do things that he should not do. Lastly, and most importantly, Isolde preferred Vilya's personality over Kerwin's, and the two had a better relationship in private. A coup? Are you crazy? The princess's pupils suddenly shrank, and she was so frightened that she shuddered. No, I'm not crazy. This is the only way to save the kingdom and your family. I know the political situation of the kingdom very well, and I also know how stupid your father and the other nobles are. Even if you tell them everything you see here, they won't believe you. They might even play tricks in the dark to test the Master's reaction and bottom line. Think about it. Once these actions infuriate the master, what will happen to your kingdom? I want to assure you that it will not be a disaster that can be resolved with the deaths of dozens or hundreds of people. Thousands of people will be buried with them. The master is not a person who likes to be reasonable. To some extent, he represents the truth and absolute justice. Isolde did not try to hide anything and told her everything he knew. He understood how difficult it was for a princess who had lived in a sheltered environment since childhood to make up her mind to launch a coup. Unless she realized that the situation was really irreversible, Vilya would not betray her father and country, even if her life was in danger. I need some time to think about it. Princess Vilya clenched her fists tightly and did not give an answer immediately. Is 3 days enough? Isolde didn't continue to force the issue and took the initiative to propose a deadline. If he did not get a satisfactory answer before the deadline, he would mercilessly abandon the princess. As for whether she would be imprisoned in this tower as a canary to be admired or sent to Kerwin to be tortured, that would depend on fate. It's enough. I promise that I'll give you an accurate answer in 3 days. Very good. Then we'll meet again in 3 days. During this time, you can live in the lower level of the magic tower. There will be artificial maids to take care of your daily life. Remember, don't try to provoke the master, and don't try to show off your cleverness. His wisdom is far beyond your imagination. After saying this, Isolde directly cast a teleportation spell and disappeared, while the princess went back the way she came, thinking about that devilish suggestion. Chapter 1078. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. When Vilya appeared in front of Zhang Cheng again, she was no longer as delicate as before. Instead, she looked tired and mature. That's right. In just 3 short days, the cruel reality and choices had forced this young girl, who was originally in the best stage of her life, to grow up quickly. She understood that if she could not meet the other party's demands, she might not die, but her family and kingdom would be finished. There is nothing that could resist the millions of terrifying monsters in the underground maze, and no army could fight them to the death. After thinking this through, the princess took a deep breath and imitated the humble manner of her servants. She bowed deeply and said, "Thank you for your kindness. You have forgiven my rudeness and ignorance last time. I have thought it through, and I am willing to accept any conditions you offer, as long as the kingdom and my father can survive." "Oh, are you sure you want to accept any conditions?" Zhang Cheng looked at the princess from head to toe and asked in a playful manner. Because the natives of this planet were very similar to the humans on Earth, especially their facial features and figures. They were full of the combination of strength and beauty. This made him inadvertently recall the days of the past. As one's lifespan grew longer, memories began to pile up like books in a library. Some of them were covered in a thick layer of dust, while others were like flashbacks, triggered by certain scenes or people. That's right. No matter what you want, or what you want to do, I will cooperate with you without hesitation. But there is one condition, and that is that I must have a status no lower than Kerwin. Vilya replied with a serious face. Very good. At least your attitude is quite satisfactory. As he spoke, Zhang Cheng stood up from the chair he had been sitting on for several days. He stretched out his hand and pinched the princess' chin, looking at her pair of light blue eyes. You know what? In fact, I don't care about the grudge between you and Kerwin at all, nor do I care if you want to kill him or not. To be precise, as long as you complete the task I give you, even if one of you destroys the other, it has nothing to do with me. But there is one condition. If anyone destroys my plans and experiments, I promise that person will suffer a torture 10,000 times more painful than death. You mean I can do what I want to do most at a suitable time? Vilya was undoubtedly very sharp and caught the main point immediately. Zhang Cheng smiled and nodded. Yes, usually I don't interfere with the personal grudges of my servants and have no interest in those trivial matters. You can understand that I am an isolated observer, and everything I do is to collect experimental data. All right, let's end this topic here. Now, I'll give you some knowledge, taboo knowledge that can change your fate and make your kingdom incredibly powerful. Of course, The prerequisite is that you have to kill your own father first and become the undisputed ruler of the country. As his voice trailed off, he directly imparted a portion of the advanced technology that was at least 1,000 years ahead of this world into the princess's brain. The feeling of tens of thousands of needles piercing her brain made Vilya scream and fall to the ground with a thud. Her body twitched uncontrollably, and her snot, tears, and saliva flowed out uncontrollably, forming a small pool of mixed liquid on the ground. Thank goodness. This kind of pain came and went quickly. When the girl gradually regained consciousness, she suddenly found that countless pieces of knowledge that she could not imagine or even understand were all stored in the depths of her mind. Clear, profound, complex. Most importantly, this knowledge could be used to create powerful weapons. As long as she had them, the kingdom could even sweep away all the surrounding countries and become an unprecedented overlord of the continent. Just as Vilya was overjoyed by the additional memories in her mind, Isolde, who had been standing silently at the side, suddenly coughed hard and reminded her in a low voice, "Your Highness, it's best if you quickly get up to wash up and change into clean clothes." Wash up? Clothes? Vilya subconsciously looked down at the ground, and her slightly pale face suddenly flushed red. "Damn it! Please excuse me for a moment." Then, without another word, she lifted her soaked dress and ran straight to the bathroom on the lower floor, afraid that she would be laughed at if she stayed. After watching the princess's figure gradually disappear into the distance, Isolde asked in an uncertain tone, "Master, what did you give her?" "Nothing much, just some methods to make some interesting gadgets. You know, I've always liked to see the original order being broken. Chaos, destruction, and slaughter fill every inch of land. Nothing can compare to the beauty of chaos." Zhang Cheng returned to his seat and rested his chin on his right hand, a chilling glint in his eyes. Needless to say, he had unknowingly become a destroyer and beneficiary of the rules, and at the same time, he enjoyed the process. In his eyes, life and soul would only explode with the most brilliant brilliance when the conflict was intensified to the extreme. All kindness, evil, ambition, desire, bravery, and sacrifice would be magnified without exception, revealing the truest self in the depths of one's heart, and not the hypocritical and cowardly masks under the constraints of the order. Perhaps this unparalleled sense of reality was the scene that Zhang Cheng wanted to see the most. After all, as a ruler who was almost above all intelligent life, he no longer had the desire for power and transcendence that he used to have. Instead, it was a kind of settling down, a kind of understanding of the rules that came from the depths of his soul. Although I can't understand your wisdom that is higher than the mountains and deeper than the sea, I'm willing to follow you forever, even if it means destroying the world. Isolde suppressed his fear and hurriedly knelt down to show his loyalty. He could feel that the person he was pledging his loyalty to was definitely not joking, especially the astonishing aura that was unintentionally released. It was simply suffocating. Haha, no, I don't need an oath of loyalty from you. All I want is action. All right, I'll leave the princess to you. Help her complete the coup and ascend to the throne. Also, send a warning to Kerwin. At least let him know that his laughable little actions have always been under my watch. Zhang Cheng ordered casually. Your will is my command. Isolde bowed again, and then disappeared around the corner of the corridor. Chapter 1079. What kind of knowledge did you give to that female life form? Not long after the two left, Gru broke through the dimension and appeared in the tower once more. His tone was filled with intense curiosity. Female life form? Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows. He clearly didn't expect to hear this term from Gru. However, Gru didn't seem to mind this. He waved his antenna-like receiver and replied, "Of course it's a female life form. I've tested her genetic sequence before. There's no way I'm wrong." No. That's not what I meant." Zhang Cheng hurriedly shook his head with a smile. "What I meant was, why did he use the term female life form, and not words like girl or woman? Could it be that in your eyes, there's no other intelligent life form that's worthy of a non-derogatory term other than the ruler? Just because of this? Of course not. This is a difference in our sense of beauty. Think about it. If you see a female life form that looks like me, what kind of words would you use to address her? Gru asked meaningfully. One had to admit that his reasoning was quite sound. Even though the rulers had already broken away from the limits of their original race in essence, they could even abandon their physical bodies and exist purely in a state that surpassed matter and energy. However, no matter what, some of their deep-rooted habits wouldn't change. The most typical of them was their sense of beauty. Almost every ruler would be inclined to create life according to their own appearance. At the same time, they would also provide help to those life forms that were similar to their original race, allowing them the opportunity to break away from their ignorance and gradually enter the interstellar era. Zhang Cheng could understand this difference. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he sighed. All right. You're right. I don't intend to argue with you on this issue. As for the knowledge I gave her, it's obviously disguised. On the surface, it looks like some kind of powerful magical tool, but in essence, it's a type of antimatter extraction device. Think about it. In this primitive and barbaric world, what do you think will happen if an antimatter bomb suddenly appears on the battlefield? Antimatter. Gru's eyes instantly lit up. Interesting. It's simply too interesting. As long as the first antimatter bomb appears on the battlefield, the entire planet will become like the myth that your hometown often talks about, opening Pandora's box. Nothing can stop the intensification of conflicts and drastic changes in the structure of society. That's right. Everyone would go crazy over this destructive power. At that time, they would do everything they could to try to steal and copy the device. Then, they would launch an invasion, occupation, and annexation at an unimaginable speed. Of course, in order to make the whole process more interesting, I also set a small upper limit. As he spoke, Zhang Cheng transmitted the blueprint of the device he had designed through the spiritual connection. For the rulers of the universe, who controlled the rules of the universe, things like antimatter were not advanced technology at all. They were toys similar to firecrackers. But his was different. Not only was it a pure technological creation, but it was also a magical creation, combining the two into one on a certain level. The advantage was that there was no need to slowly increase the level of technology. With just a few key magic techniques, the finished product could be quickly created. However, the disadvantages were equally obvious. It could not be compared to the mass production of industrial assembly lines. The production rate was quite low, and it could not be used as a conventional weapon. Gru roughly read through the blueprint in his mind and commented thoughtfully, "It's a very interesting design. It's filled with wild imagination. I'm really looking forward to the development of the story. You know, I've almost forgotten how long it's been since I was this excited. As a high and mighty ruler, isn't one of the greatest pleasures of being able to control the fates of mortals at will and play with them like wives? Moreover, we can also do some small experiments along the way. After all, I'm now exposed in front of everyone. Why don't we do something crazy?" As he spoke, Zhang Cheng turned his head to look at the gloomy sky outside the window. It was as if he could see through the atmosphere and see the eyes hidden in the depths of space. He could feel that after the initiators came, something had been constantly circling this planet. Perhaps it was some sort of detector or something like that. It could also be another ruler nearby. In any case, this inexplicable pressure made the crazy side of his heart itch to try it out. "Don't worry. I guarantee that no one will dare to do anything to you at this time. Otherwise, it'll be a declaration of war against the entire Chaos faction. The Order wouldn't dare, and the Neutral wouldn't dare, because you've already begun to display the strength and wisdom that a ruler should have. Perhaps you're not mature yet, but one day, you'll catch up to everyone and even surpass everyone." Gru comforted casually. He didn't seem to care about the strangeness in the surrounding air at all. He walked to the balcony and threw a few small golden metal beetles into the sky. Not long after, these little bugs turned into streaks of golden light, breaking through the obstruction of gravity and disappearing into the boundless space. "What are you doing?" Zhang Cheng asked with interest. "I'm sending a message in a way that no one else can decipher. Also, I hope that you can attend the next meeting of the Chaos faction. You should know that there are many sovereigns who are looking forward to meeting you. At the same time, They want to discuss the motives behind your crazy actions. Perhaps you're not aware, but your indescribable plan only has a success rate of 0.003%. No matter how you look at it, you should have been torn to pieces by bowstring's power instead of living to become a ruler. Until now, no one has been able to figure out whether it's because you're too lucky or because of some other reason. Gru explained unhurriedly as he turned around. So you're saying my success can't be replicated? Zhang Cheng narrowed his eyes and revealed a pensive expression. Yes, it can't be replicated. After all, there are so many main bowstrings in the universe, but only 32 intelligent life forms can be called rulers. If there's a possibility of replication, do you think the rulers won't try it? On the other hand, the other you who joined the Order faction has a very high success rate, so much so that many rulers are secretly experimenting with it. Haha, I can guarantee that these fellows who try to replicate the success of the initiator will all fail in the end without exception. You don't understand him, and you don't understand how much he likes to hide. Sometimes I even feel that the reason he joined the Order faction isn't because he agrees with the Order faction itself, but for some other purpose. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1080. Motivation was a psychological inclination or internal drive that stimulated and maintained an organism's actions and directed the action toward a certain goal. Generally speaking, motivation was strictly in the category of psychology. It was the inevitable result of the interaction between the individual behavior of intelligent life and the outside world. Almost every action had some kind of motivation behind it without exception. Some of them were particularly strong and easy to detect, while some were so hidden that even the person involved would subconsciously ignore them. Without a doubt, Zhang Cheng had no idea what kind of deep meaning was behind the seemingly illogical actions of the initiator. According to his understanding, such people would never do meaningless things, let alone wholeheartedly join an organization with a strong binding force, unless the initiator believed that he could become the supreme leader of the entire organization at some point in the future. That was right. Unwillingness to submit to others and a strong desire for ambition were the characteristics that both of them had in common. They would not change so easily. While Zhang Cheng stayed alone on the upper floor of the Wizard Tower, analyzing the experimental data that he had just obtained not long ago and thinking about what the initiator was planning, Gru quietly left the desolate planet in the corner of the universe and came to a special space that was completely constructed by 4 special fulcrum points. At a glance, both the sky and the ground were gray. Moreover, it was like a curled plane that kept twisting and rotating. It was as if there was no end to it no matter where one was. No matter where one was, the ground beneath one's feet would always be hard. Perhaps even the most advanced space civilization would not be able to comprehend such a strange space compression and folding technology. But now, it actually appeared in the form of a physical object in such an unknown corner. Feeling the terrifying pressure in the surrounding air, Gru gently waved the tentacle-like signal receiver and asked in a slightly low voice, "My dear old friend, why haven't you appeared yet? Are you going to play this boring game of hide-and-seek with me every time we meet? Why not? After all, you've praised me before that my use of the space rule has reached the extreme. There's no other dominator in the entire universe that can compare to me in this aspect." A slightly cynical voice echoed in the air. It was unknown whether it was because of the curled space or because the other party had used a special voice technique, but in any case, the voice did not reveal his position. Instead, it continued to reverberate, forming an endless echo. I did praise him, but you have to understand that no matter how amazing the skills and knowledge are, in the end, you will become numb or even accustomed to them as you see more and more of them. I've already seen through your little tricks, so come out. I have something interesting to share with you. Gru shifted his gaze to a unique plant not far away as he spoke. There was no hesitation. There wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation. The 2 rows of small eyes were clearly telling the other party that they knew he was hiding inside. Damn it. All right. I admit that these little tricks are a bit old-fashioned. Maybe we could try something else next time. Accompanied by a series of complaints, The flower at the top of the plant suddenly bloomed at an extremely fast speed. An intelligent life form that looked like a little fairy with a pair of transparent insect wings flew out from the center of the flower. She was so petite, less than 15 centimeters tall, but her entire body exuded the astonishing aura of a top-level life form in the universe. There was no need to ask to know that this was a ruler. Although she looked extremely weak and harmless, in reality, she could make an entire galaxy disappear with a flick of her finger. This little thing circled around Gru twice, then raised her hand and snapped her fingers, creating a towering chair in midair. She sat down on it, crossed her legs, and asked, "You said you have something to share with me. What is it?" "It's very simple. The path of a ruler's growth. To be more precise, I discovered a secret that he hasn't discovered yet. Do you know? That newly advanced ruler's soul is missing the most important part. Someone severed a part of his soul when he was still an ordinary mortal." Galu replied with a profound tone. "Cut off a part of his soul." The unknown ruler was clearly shocked. "Oh, no. This isn't good news." Gru nodded seriously in agreement. "That's right. The most inconceivable thing is that he himself discovered this hidden soul fragment, but for some reason he didn't retrieve it. Instead, he threw it away like trash. If I'm not mistaken, this soul fragment should be in the hands of another newly advanced ruler. It's hard to imagine that a lunatic would do something so overboard to his parallel universe. Then what do you think we should do? Go help him?" The unknown ruler blinked with interest, a cold smile appearing on her delicate little face. "Help? I have no intention of getting involved in their grudges. No matter what, they represented a possibility of wireless communication. Don't forget, since the birth of the universe, no ruler has been able to fuse more than two main strings. But now, I believe that the first truly exceptional case will appear very soon." As Gru said this, her emotions fluctuated intensely. Her two insect-like forelimbs danced wildly. The unknown ruler pondered for a moment, then immediately said in an uncertain tone, "I understand what you mean. As projections of the universe's origin in a parallel universe, their natures are very similar. It could even be said that they are the same. This means that as long as they don't reject each other, they can become one. At that time, the power of both sides would be combined into one, even though it might cause a change in personality and subjective consciousness. No matter what, he will become powerful and unrivaled. I have to admit that the person who came up with this plan is definitely a genius through and through. At the same time, he's also a true lunatic. Even though the universe has no lack of lunatics, he's definitely the first lunatic who's so crazy that he doesn't even plan on preserving his subjective consciousness." "Then what's your plan? Don't tell me that you haven't even come up with a decent plan." "Plan? Of course I have a plan. First, I plan to talk to that fellow who joined the Order faction and try to confirm whether or not he's doing this consciously. However, in order to avoid the eyes and ears of the other rulers, I need your help. In the entire universe, only you can send me to the designated location without alerting anyone.